A way to categorize characterization is by complexity, the amount of things you can think and talk about a character. The way to separate complexity in categories is by seeing it as dimensions, with each one serving a completely different purpose. More dimensions doesn't mean better characters, it only means more food for thought. In fact, anything past 4 is overkill and usually works against the integrity of characterization, but for the sake of discussion, I will mention all of them. A zero-dimensional character is like a dot. He has no complexity about him or a way to separate him from any others of his kind, since all dots are the same. This is why such characters are usually identically dressed or drawn as if they are mass-cloned, and their loss means nothing since they can be replaced just as easily as they are killed. They have no distinctive personality, they do not affect the plot, they do not make you care about them, and they serve the role of background crowds, stunts or cannon fodder. Although seemingly worthless, they are necessary for purposes of scope. They make a setting feel alive by being populated by countless people other than the main characters. They make a ruler or a boss to show he has authority by controlling vast armies of unnamed soldiers. They make a contestant in a tournament to feel like he is indeed talented if he managed to be better than thousands of other contestants. They are the little guys who allow the major characters to be important by making them stand out in the crowd. Unlike the previous category, a one-dimensional character is defined by personality traits or gimmicks, but only one of them. Anything revolves around that one thing and repeats itself like a running joke. They are what we call one-note characters and can get boring pretty fast if situations repeat too often. Although seemingly possible, they are easy to write if you are an author or remember if you are a reader, thanks to their simple behavior, and can make any message very clear thanks to their straightforward attitude. They are also excellent material for fan fiction, since you can flesh them out in any way you like without contradicting their close to no complexity in personality. If you are dealing with comedies, fairy tales, or low-effort otaku pandering, this is the ideal category. Two-dimensional characters are defined by two opposing traits such as good versus evil or generosity versus greed, with many grades in between. Unlike 1D, they are not static in their behavior, since depending on circumstances, they can move from one trait to another, such as turning from villains to good guys or from polite to rude. Their ideals are challenged and their opinions change, but only in a linear way. This is what we call cartoony characters, because just like in traditional comics, any grey mentality they might be showing can only be between two opposing traits. If you are making a low expectations story, this category is a fine building block. Three-dimensional characters are defined by several traits which do not have to be relevant with one another. For example, a character can like video games, be a Buddhist, write with his left hand, none of which need to be directly related. It's about fleshing out someone by giving him a personality that is not limited to a couple of things and having each of his activities not affecting the rest in the same volume. Having a multitude of interests makes him feel closer to a real person, as well as making the outcome of his actions not that predictable because he has multiple side quests or goals. Slice of life series tend to have a lot of 3D since they focus on the mundane aspect of life, instead of an obsession with just sports, hobbies or fighting, which is the trademark of 2D. Four-dimensional characters are about a change and progress. It's character development in the form of seeing someone acting or thinking differently as time goes by. This can be very tricky to do right, since many changes are not developing a character or they don't offer actual progress. Getting older, for example, does not mean someone will automatically become smarter or more mature. Other examples include power-ups, better gear, different clothes, and anything that is purely cosmetic. The change needs to be internal, not external. And even when it is internal, there are still lots of cases when it's pseudo-development. Changing behavior for a while before resetting back to how he was at first is also not development because it's not a permanent change. This is what we call character regression, often found in series that want to maintain the status quo no matter what. Rewriting someone's personality for the sake of plot is also not development because it contradicts how he normally reacts to situations. This is what we call a bipolar character, often found in schlock series that do not care about consistency. Fifth-dimensional characters are all about parallel character development. Time flows seemingly in a linear fashion when there is only one universe or one reality. In case the story includes parallel dimensions, then you can have the same character developing differently because of the different outcomes caused by his actions. What makes this category intriguing is thinking of what-if scenarios and figuring out how things would play out if the actions were different. It's mostly food for thought and doesn't really make someone more deep or complex. 5D key characters are not interacting with other versions of themselves from different realities. In case they do through dimensional portals or time travel, then they are sixth dimensional. The different what-if scenarios happen in series by the characters redoing something or preventing certain events from ever happening. I don't like this category at all. It's heavily based on time resets which render plot completely meaningless. What is the point of changing one reality when there is an infinite number of them? You're not even helping out the same people because it's a different dimension. Let's be honest. This is just a gimmick for making it seem like there is no plot armor because major characters are dying all the time. It fools the superficial mind to consider this tension when in reality nobody stays dead permanently and there is an infinite number of retries. Seventh dimensional characters are about reboots and remakes. While 6D requires the character to jump in space and time, 7D doesn't have to do that because it is a self-aware retelling of the same story. Everything is different in this version because someone else is the author or the director and presents the story with a different mindset. The problem with this category is how it makes the story derivative for being changed to an older version. It will always be compared unfavorably to the original, and it will even actively bet all its money on nostalgia by making references and in-jokes about what it's based on. This tends to make the characters seem like imitations who on one hand try too hard to be like the older ones, and on the other to have an updated style about them, which tends to alienate the fandom for not being exactly the same as before. So far, each character is limited to his personal story. If for whatever reason he crosses over to the story of a completely different character, then he becomes an 8th dimensional character. It's the concept of the multiverse, where seemingly standalone stories can now interact and flavor one another with new ideas and mechanics. The problem with this category is how it is often no more than fan service, a gimmick done for the sake of increasing the sales instead of offering something actually new. And in case it does offer something new by affecting characters and universes, it makes things convoluted by blending ideas that were seemingly fine on their own. When an author needs to resort to crossovers for flavoring his characters, then he's basically telling you he ran out of ideas and needs external aid to keep going. So basically it's something you do when a story gets stagnated and can survive only by getting bastardized with irrelevant concepts. 9th dimensional characters saturate this concept even further. So far, characters were limited to the same franchise and were following some sort of logic and consistency. 9D disregards that and brings together seemingly irrelevant universes with characters that follow completely different in-series universal laws. It almost always has to do with fictional versus battles and has very little consistency. I consider them pointless, and it's not because you'll never see characters from completely different series fighting each other in canon. Everybody wants to see two powerful personas fight, yet very few care about the fairness of the duel. There are hundreds of variants that decide the outcome in actual fights, and these duels are simplifying everything down to raw power and speed. The environment must not favor anyone, special attacks must not make it one-sided, stealth is not allowed, knowing the main weakness of the opponent is out of the question. Stripping away all these things for the sake of a balanced duel makes the battle completely boring, because this is not how these characters normally fight. Can you imagine Superman fighting without a yellow sun, or Batman fighting without his utility belt? What is the fun in that? Actual battles are never meant to be fair. You are supposed to win by using any means necessary. If you have to uphold sportsmanship, you don't have a battle, you have a sport or a friendly spar. If everything comes down to how strong someone is in a direct confrontation, you might as well decide the winner by scouting their battle power. No actual fighting is required. Tactics and trickery are used to increase the chances of success. If you can't use them, what's the point of fighting? There is also the issue of how two characters who use completely different laws of physics in their respective series can fight each other in the first place, since they are using different rules altogether. You can't even have a balanced duel to begin with, and that's without even considering how almost every story with superpowers doesn't have steady rules and rewrites them all the time for the sake of tension. Finally, you should take into consideration how many characters were made to be overpowered and to always win. If losing is not an option, what is the point of fighting? You know the outcome. This is extra unfair for characters who are conceived as flawed and improve from their defeats. Of course, these guys are going to lose if they take on any of them made-to-win characters. It's part of who they are. So again, what is the point of fighting? You know the outcome. Finally, we have the 10th dimensional characters who are no more than guest stars in any random story for any random reason. If 9D was specifically about two different characters fighting, this can be about any action that is not shared by both characters. Anything can happen in any crazy way you like it. It is imagination and creativity at its peak, since you don't have to keep them in character or use their powers with consistency. And since it's complete randomness, it means these characters are no longer characters, but excuses to make any sort of parody or a statement. It is usually very disrespectful to them and extremely cringy, since it mutates them in any grotesque idea an artist has in mind. This category can be seen as brainstorming and free expression, but it still falls under copyright rules, so it's better to be used only for non-profitable satire or as a template for creating your own original characters. And since all characters begin from simple concepts that are fleshed out as you go along, the whole concept of original characters loops back to 1D and the procedure starts all over again. And that is how characterization goes full circle based on 10 dimensions. One of the many reasons that drove me away from cartoons and into anime back in the 80s was how reactive their heroes were. The bad guys were always proactive and thus more fun to watch because they were constantly trying to do something, whereas the good guys were just maintaining the status quo. If the bad guys were not attacking, the heroes had no objectives, no goals, they couldn't exist without a conflict. And that's boring. If the viewer prefers seeing what the bad guys are going to do than seeing the good guys sit all day, your show is shit! And I'm not saying all anime had proactive characters, but they were definitely giving them more things to do. I can even see why that was happening. Despite all animated series being toy advertisements since the early 80s, anime didn't care that much about offending the audience. There were no ridiculous restrictions like in the West. They were allowed to stuff their characters with personality quirks, thus giving them more of an identity. Modern anime characters feel less lively because everyone became a sensitive little cunt who gets triggered by a breeze and calls his lawyer. Anime companies take fewer risks nowadays and make characters less proactive and distinctive, thus making the merchandising more obvious because the quirky personalities are not masking the exploitation, something which tends to be extremely immersion breaking. And who can blame the companies when they are using blank self-inserts? It takes the least effort to handle them and gives you the most positive feedback, since the majority of the audience is a bunch of tasteless casuals who believe cardboard cutouts are the most relatable characters. They think and act exactly as you do, since they are empty husks and you are projecting anything you like on them. Furthermore, if they want to give a flavor to the characters, they can do it through side characters, which is why side characters are almost always more interesting than the main ones. They are not limited to being bland and indecisive, they don't need to be self-inserts, they can have personality, extreme opinions and a decisive stance, instead of being a bit of everything and thus nothing as a whole. This way the protagonist will always be a perfect indecisive self-insert who remains passive, doesn't have to take a side, and no sensitive cunts get triggered. Of course, passive leads become boring very fast since they're not doing anything. Furthermore, we have reached a point where beta crybabies are considered normal. They keep trying to promote the average high school boy as this introvert otaku who doesn't want anything from his life. He can have hacks, superpowers, a ton of women, a prophecy to save the world, and all he does is getting bitch slapped by obnoxious girls and cries in a corner. If you are not a low-esteem masochist, you are not going to find this relatable. Fortunately, your average otaku, the target audience for most modern anime, is exactly that. So from his perspective, this is real and happens all the time. Which is not, since your average teenager is a smartass who aspires to do great things in his life. If he finds the chance to screw or grab a breast or pick in a bathroom, he's gonna do it. He's not going to scream and ask for forgiveness if he opens a door and sees a chick undressing. What they are presenting as the done-to-death stereotype of an average teenager is a lie. He's in reality an empowerment fantasy and a lazy way to have a self-insert reactive character who is not what he claims to be. Therefore, he's not a better alternative to protagonists who have a character, have a goal, and are active about it. And by the way, the average human would abuse any power given to him. Given the opportunity, he won't wear his pajamas and run out there to save the world. He will use his powers for money, women, and fame. Why? Because he's average. He's not a saint, he's a greedy, horny, selfish profiteer. Which is why all these Boy Scout heroes are so uninteresting and makes you wanna cheer for the bad guys. Don't make us cheer for the bad guys, just give us flawed characters with personality and goals instead of making us feel you're making toy advertisements for man children. Picture-perfect characters are boring, we cannot relate to what is perfect for we are not perfect ourselves. This is why it's easier to sympathize with flawed characters despite them often making some pretty terrible mistakes.
Here is an interesting question regarding that. How much imperfection makes someone sympathetic, and how does that differ from someone who is a terrible person because he is flawed? A big part of it has to do with how someone is presented to the audience. If the show wants you to hate someone, it's gonna do its best to make you hate him. If it wants you to love him, it will present it like he's worth cheering for. But what about all those cases when the show doesn't do that and the exact same character is sympathetic for some and terrible for others? Why do we have people constantly wondering what is the appeal of certain characters that seem to be relatable to many people, yet others find them to be horrible for the exact same reasons? The easy answer would be a fulfillment of desires. If a character does something you personally wish it had happened to you, then you like him for making a dream come true.
There's a side of me that secretly conceals an escapist mind that makes me want to go into an anime world and live peacefully with a bunch of non-existent moe schoolgirls.
If a character is something you personally wish was close to you, then you like him or her simply for fulfilling a desire.
My excitement for this show is based on 3 objective facts. Tosaka-rin is insanely hot. Tosaka-rin's voice is insanely hot. Tosaka-rin is best girl.
That makes it sound like it works only when it's an empowerment fantasy, yet there is another factor that must be taken into account. There are many ugly characters we feel sympathy for despite not wanting to be like them or be part of the world they are living in. What happens in that case? It's about resolution. We want a character to find his piece of heaven at the end, and we are willing to forgive him for making mistakes along the way, since nothing works out exactly as we plan it, and if it does, it would be too easy and the reward wouldn't feel very satisfactory because he didn't struggle much to gain it. Here's what it comes down to. In its basic form, pain is a learning tool. If you put your hand over a fire, you're going to burn your hand, so don't do it again. By extension, physical or mental punishment is supposed to be teaching you how not to repeat mistakes. Almost like trial and error, you learn through suffering and become a better man. Making mistakes is forgivable. Repeating them, not so much. Our tolerance grows thinner every time someone refuses to change his ways, or at least to do things differently after every time he fails. Or, as we call it in fiction, to get some character development. The aversion we feel towards someone doesn't have to do that much with him making mistakes, as much as it has to do with believing he's not trying to change. As long as that feeling is there, we will stop considering a character to be sympathetic, and we will find him to be obnoxious.
It definitely feels like this is more of an adult Dragon Ball. It feels as though Dragon Ball with this arc grew up with us finally.
Goku has been that way ever since we first met him 30 years ago. That youthful innocence that Goku had as a child really can't be used as an excuse anymore. He is a guy in his 40s, and it was raised to new levels of annoyance.
One of the most preposterous defenses of bad writing has to do with the characterization of the protagonist and the main villain. There are so many who defend the shitty characters by simplifying everything down to how much they love or hate them. For example, all those one-dimensional rapey villains in light novels are very well written because they made you hate them, like all villains are supposed to do. And all those bland shonen protagonists are so well written because they made you love them. Aside from how appeal has nothing to do with writing, it also reveals the lack of effort placed in the conception of these archetypes. It's very easy to write heroes you will love or villains you will love to hate. Although there is nothing bad at enjoying a simple show for its simplicity, the real talent of a creator lies in his ability to do the exact opposite and challenge the predisposition of the audience. When he makes them hate to love a villain because he's charming and up to a point correct, even when he's otherwise the bad guy. Or when they are made to dislike a hero for not being heroic and yet his flaws are what make him so much more realistic than your typical Gary Stu. Blurring the lines of good and evil is what truly creates compelling characters. It gives them more dimensions and food for thought. Actual thought, not overthinking power-ups through the power of friendship. P.S. Actions do not define a character, they only defined what he did. Taking things at face value is not really telling you what someone really is, so always look for motivations instead of actions. Many characters show their true colors only when you know how they think instead of how they act, and prove they are not simply black or white. The abusive mother of Erased is often defended as being well written because she too was the victim of abuse by someone else. She became a one-dimensional evil adult because of another one-dimensional evil adult. Aside from how this is a lazy appeal to emotion through victimizing, which never makes a character better, it is also part of a stupid trope called mimicked character development. It's when a writer is so incompetent at thinking ways to develop his characters that the only thing he can do is to simply have them copy the personalities of others. It's the same thing with the protagonist of Tokyo Ghoul, where his character development is essentially mimicking the personality of his store mentor, before getting amnesia and losing that as well. Character development at its finest. And I know what many of you will say, that people mimic others all the time when they are still looking for an identity. Yeah, and what is the reason for this? Because they are dull and unimaginative, just like all these lazily written characters in fiction. True character development is about bringing out what is already there and not shoehorning someone else's personality inside an empty shell. Let me give you a good example from Fist of the North Star, which is full of retcons and asspools, yet it did this little part wonderfully. So the first major villain had the hots for the protagonist's girlfriend, so he abducts her. That's such a dick move only a one-dimensional villain would do. But as it is revealed later on, he was convinced to do this act by another villain who wanted to avenge the protagonist for making fun of him, meaning he became a villain because his dark desires, which were always there, came out because he was affected by an asshole that also did this for a reason. This aspect of the story is brilliant. Thus, once again, Retro always wins, fuck erased and Tokyo Ghoul. What a big surprise! In the second episode of Cabaneri, the teenagers get zombie powers and fight with steam-propelled weapons. Who could have guessed that? Aside from being predictable, it's also not interesting as a twist. It's an overused concept to have the good guys using the powers of the bad guys against them. It can be used in a lazy way, such as the good guys being the only ones who can hurt the bad guys when everything else has no effect. It's a straightforward case of fighting fire with fire while everybody else is made of wood. It can also be used in a more interesting way, by blurring the concept of what is good and evil. A hero with a dark side is always in danger of losing control and becoming the very thing he fights. He's not simply fighting fire with fire, he's also slowly consumed by it. Basically, using enemy powers is far more interesting when they are not just a cheap power-up, but also extend to affecting the mentality of the one using said powers. If you fight monsters by becoming a monster yourself, then what does being human means anymore? Yet, even that concept becomes simplistic after a while if the opposition has no ideology or identity of its own. If the bad guys are just mindless monsters which attack humans just because, then there is very little to explore. It is still pretty easy to tell what is good and bad, and the hero is simply trying not to become evil. Imagine a scenario where in order to fight aliens you needed to think like them as means to predict what they will do next. The more you try to understand them, not so you can use their technology but to simply find ways to defeat them, the more you are slowly becoming like them. It's not a terrifying thought, since you're not turning into a monster, you're just getting used to the logic the enemy is using, which makes you eerie to those around you since, well, they don't think nor want to think like the aliens. This alienation, no pun intended, is the most intriguing form of fighting fire with fire, since you are not consumed by fire. You willingly become the fire so you can control it from within. It has to do with transcendence, where you leave behind your loved ones and earthly possessions for something greater. Not necessarily serving the greater good by becoming evil, you just aim for something more significant. The Halo chakra, enlightenment, transhumanism. It has more to do with nostalgia and letting things go than the terror of becoming a demon or some corny shit like that. Now that's a great concept following the same logic. Because of the terrible taste the masses have, senseless violence and over-excessive death counts have become a common thing over the past years, reaching a point where most fans don't give a shit about characterization.
That's one of the main reasons why I like, that Moe Zombie Girl anime.
Remember all those times I said killing characters too often and too soon after they are introduced destroys their characterization? Well, the industry realized that, and instead of stopping the excessive deaths, it simply stopped their characterization. They are now literally treated as those cardboard cutouts we use for target practice. Last season there was Gunslinger Stratos. The only hype it had as a show was the partial involvement of the one and only Uro Butcher in the story department.
Oh, that is disgusting.
They even openly said before the show began that major characters are going to die. That was the hook they used to make people watch the show. And that was exactly what the show was about. Characters with barely any character killing each other. And they are not even fighting other people, it's just them again from an alternative dimension. Why bother to have different people with different personalities when you can have a dozen of the same cardboard cutout looking and acting differently?
a very, very good anime that allow you to theory craft about many different things.
For extra flavor, they even show innocent little children turning to dust before the horrified eyes of their parents. Characterization? What is that? Just look at innocent people turning to ash. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the guy most of you consider a genius at realistic portrayal treats his characters.
Yeah, I mean, come on, it's not bad. I mean, you just die and you...
This season we have two more examples of the same thing going on. One is Chaos Dragon, where we get not only Uro Butcher, but also Nasu teaming up, so they can offer us shallow deaths of characters and then mark them off from the roster like it's a freaking hit list. See these characters, people? They are all going to die.
I've come to the conclusion after a lot of detective work that are mentally unstable.
And who can forget Game of Laplace, which is literally showing characters as cardboard cutouts and treats fetish murders as a funny game.
I'm glad we get to see that in this series and get to see some really good detective work going on.
As for personality, characters are defined only by things such as being a trap or looking like cat maids.
Very nutty.
You would think the anime community would shit on this hard, but no! I checked out the several episodic reviewers, and they all love it.
Yet to watch it, go fucking watch it, oh my god.
You are far from saved, anime community, and you are even further from expecting the rest of the world to take you seriously when you hype this bullshit.
It's not degrading or anything.
If any of you still think Uro Butcher knows how to write great characters, feast your eyes on this bullshit. He plans to make another sequel to Madoka Magica, where the characters will be the same, but will also have different personalities. What more proof do you need that the guy can only make plot devices that have no personality and behave in any way he wants them to? And don't give me excuses of the sort, other shows do the same. They do it in a comedic fashion and are nothing more than low-effort cash grabs. Only Uro Butcher throws so much money into making pretty colors about characters that overall have no specific character and still try to take themselves seriously. Don't you even give me stupid excuses of the sort, it's an alternative universe so it's excused if they behave differently. Gundam has over a dozen alternative universes as well. None of them have the same fucking characters in different fucking roles. If it's a different story in a different setting, then it needs different characters that look different. Why is it so hard to understand such a simple thing? We reached to a point where the Madoka cast is just empty husks, free to be used in any way the viewer wants them to behave, as if they are Toho or Kantai Collection bimbos. This is fan fiction, and tens of thousands of filthy casuals have the nerve to call that good characterization. Fuck them and their awful taste. P.S. This Madoka design is shamelessly ripping off Princess Tutu, just like the original series was ripping off Lyrical Nanoha and Utakata. So much for originality.
Good stories and characters have a lot in them, not on them. A character should have more personality than a sexy body. It also involves growth and change. If for whatever reason something changes, it is far more significant if it causes an internal change than an external one. The easiest to understand example regarding that is power-ups. It's when a robot gets a bigger laser cannon or a fighter learns a new technique. That stuff makes them cause more damage, alright. But what does that mean for the pilot of the robot or the mentality of the fighter? Do they just accept it and go on as if nothing changed? Or does it affect them somehow? To be honest, most of the times a power-up does change the characters, but the change is not good because it makes them less than what they were before gaining it instead of more. So technically, a power-up is almost always a character down. It's the knowledge they are aware they are flawed and incapable to find their piece of heaven. This void is what drives them to move forward and gives them depth. This is something OP characters lack completely, since there is no real tension. If you know they can overcome everything all the time with no risk or failure, they can try to throw in drama and insecurity to spice it up, but it never works in the long run, since they still have broken powers. And here is where the whole in and on issue comes into play. When they eventually get the desired power up and overcome the grim situation, what did they actually gain from all this fuss? Saving the world or their friends is not a gain, that is simply preserving what they already had from the beginning. Gaining new allies with their charisma is again not a gain, because they joined the hero for being whom he already is. Becoming the best in the world in whatever they had in mind is again not a gain. Gaining a title for his troubles means nothing if he didn't deserve it. There are those cases where they are trying to excuse it as if only the chosen one can use the special MacGuffin, nobody else.
So basically, he didn't get it because he deserved it, but because he was destined to get it even if he didn't want it to. So once again, what is he gaining out of it? Power-ups or any desire for change are meaningful when they lead to characters having something extra in them instead of on them, not going around with an extra rifle or a bigger visual effect for their aura. In fact, it's completely ridiculous when they have their robot trashed and just get a better one next episode, or die and return to life stronger some days later. All that don't actually change them. The best type of power-ups are the mental ones, overcoming the whole thing using wits than raw force. That is as internal as it gets, since this is technically how someone is becoming smarter or more cunning or wiser. And assuming he won't have forgotten everything by the next arc, this is legit character development, not a change of clothes. The same things apply to the setting. There is no point in adding more characters and not doing anything with the older ones. If you still haven't realized why fighting shonen were better in the 90s, this is the reason. They had far less characters, which means they focused on fleshing out each one of them far more than what they did with the cast of the big three of the 21st century. And although newer fighting shonen try to have more elaborate mechanics in their settings, all that go to waste because the characters living in them are defined by nothing more than a superpower and a character quirk. Despite being far more variable and complicating, they are still flat as a whole, since the characters are simply walking on them instead of affecting them from the inside. There may be a whole world out there for someone to explore, but it's hardly as meaningful as the world that exists inside of us all.
So I found this guy on Reddit wishing for a Naruto type of series with no magic and more about the children raised to be like assassins, aka actual ninjas, not magicians with bright colored clothes pretending to be ninjas. His claim is that the more grounded to reality a show is, the better it becomes. As many pointed out in their replies, the idea does not matter as much as its execution. I mean, Akame ga Kill is a darker than Naruto type of show about assassins. The tasteless casuals were calling it a deconstruction of shonen for not abusing the power of friendship, but it's not exactly a masterpiece, is it now? As this commenter pointed out, shonen shows are based on the idea of rookies overcoming challenges, no matter how hard they are. If you take the story of Naruto and you ground it to reality, everybody would be dead in a few episodes because it's impossible for greenhorns to survive in a battle with experienced assassins. And who would like the show then, As Gigak joked in his recent video, waifus are not meant to be real women. Those who are into that like them for being unreal. Nobody would want a flesh and blood yandere as a girlfriend. They are cute and sexy exactly because they are not real. Grounding the concept would not make it better. At the end of the day, it's your mind that makes something as grounded as you like, and it's completely different from how consistent it actually is. I mean, just look at this guy praising Scum's Wish, the recent masochistic misery porn, to be so grounded and real for being wrong and weird in a normal way. This makes no freaking sense, but that's how it feels about it. There is also this jewel of critical thinking where someone wrote 20 pages of why he loves Hakomari only to come to the conclusion that he's better off not thinking about its logic, because if he does, he will realize it's not as good as he thinks. Being grounded to reality is not what made Hakomari the highest rated light novel of all times. And if any of you plebs plans to mention movies like The Dark Knight being great, exactly because they are more grounded to reality, let me correct you even on that. Nobody likes The Dark Knight for The Dark Knight. It's all about the villain offering meta-commentary on the concept of superheroes before trolling the crap out of everyone with plans based on improbable circumstances. Plus, it's a pretty looking movie. So I found this article that praises A Scum's Wish as a superior series to Neon Genesis and The Flowers of Evil when it comes to exploring the messed up mentality of teenagers. The way it does it is by normalizing the conflict. It's no longer about pseudo-religious iconography trying to confuse the viewer, nor is it animated with rotoscoping that makes it ugly. It's a normal-looking show that takes a messed up situation and presents it as if it's normal. Normalizing is something a lot of pretentious overthinkers are using when analyzing a vapid series as a lazy attempt to present the most fucked up situation as if it's real and happens all the time. Such as in this article, which is desperately trying to present a Dragon Maid as if it's a deep social commentary about foreigners trying to adjust in the world despite being alien to it. All of a sudden, it's no longer fan service about a lesbian having bestiality orgies, it's deep and meaningful. They say the exact same things about any other show with abominations that are being humanized to the point of becoming cute girls doing cute things, such as in Interviews with Monster Girls, where a teacher tries to understand what it's like to be a monster by going on dates with his underage students. And it's totally not creepy because the show is presenting it as if it's something normal. normal. What all these overthinkers don't understand is that many things are meant to be disturbing because that was the intention. Neon Genesis is meant to be confusing, the Flowers of Evil is meant to be ugly, and the Holocaust is meant to be horrifying. Normalizing them is only destroying the message they are trying to convey. Normalizing is the result of the oversensitive modern viewers who find it impossible to watch something without being constantly pondered. They have reached a point where even insults need to be normal, so they won't be offended, and thus causing language to lose its meaning, since all words need to sound like the exact same type of normal.
As a queer person, I am offended.
One of the things animated features are indirectly achieving is to present us with inhuman characters that just happen to behave as humans. As much as they try to make them look normal, and as much as some people seem to get attached to what is basically a drawing, deep inside we all know they are not real. They are idealized versions of archetypes, and as such they behave in extreme and simplistic ways that can never pass as realistic. So, if you know they are not real, what is the thing that makes them relatable? Why do you care about them? It all begins with the uncanny valley effect. Every person has a different tolerance for what he considers real and relatable. My parents, for example, only like series and movies that are about everyday people doing everyday things. That is as far as their tolerance for realism goes. The moment they see something supernatural or related to science fiction, they just yell "fake" and change the channel. Other people who are fans of live-action series full of occult, magic or futuristic technologies have no problem with that. You can say they are more open-minded to what they can relate to. Anime is the next level because it's not even live action, it's animated. It requires from you to be even more open-minded with more tolerance for what you can accept as real. And of course, even these categories have their subcategories. How much science fiction can you accept before it becomes too much and you can no longer take it seriously? How much moe or fan service can you tolerate before your immersion is completely ruined? How much unorthodox can an art style be until you just can't get into it because it looks too weird? How polished does the CGI need to be so you can tolerate it as if it was hand-drawn? How much more until you tolerate it as if it was live action? These things have nothing to do with directing or script writing. They are pure aesthetics which, as I mentioned in an earlier topic, count as the least important when it comes to the value of a title. But there is also something which most people usually don't realize when it comes to tolerance, even when subconsciously it can excuse a lot of aesthetic issues, and that would be the origin of the characters. Think of an animated character who is presented as a human next to a character who is presented as an alien. If the human does something weird or stupid, the audience will mind that a lot more than if the alien does the exact same thing. The reason is because an alien is not a human. He is not confined to human standards. No matter how human he looks, a simple thing such as being told he is from another planet is enough to put our minds at ease. The same thing happens with an artificial human. If a robot does something bad, it is a lot easier to be excused next to a human doing the same thing. We can simply say that it wasn't part of its programming, or it doesn't comprehend the concept of morality. How can the human be excused without resorting to the down-to-death excuse of "he was a teenager, he wasn't thinking straight"? Some other reasons, such as being antisocial or suffering from chunibyo, hold far better, but they are still weaker to the robot excuse. What I will mention now may sound very strange, but it's also very true for the time period it was originally conceived in. A big part of the appeal Superman and Astro Boy had, which instantly made them very popular, was their inhuman side. Okay, it also had to do with the simple fact that they were the first superhero and the first anime series respectively, but that wouldn't be enough to make them as iconic as they are today. We may be joking about Superman being a boring Gary Stu with broken powers, but back in the decade he was originally created, it was his alien side that excused all that. The race he belonged to was supposed to be mentally superior, plus he had a fine upbringing to further solidify all that. And most may consider Astro Boy to be a typical protagonist of a kid's show, but they usually forget how he was a robot with the memories of a human, and how he kept trying to learn from others as means means to be accepted as a human in a world that was treating robots as nothing but tools. They were both empowerment fantasy archetypes, of course, but they were far better at excusing their supernatural side next to most other human heroes who just had an accident, got superpowers, and decided to help humanity or something. That is why overpowered Garry's 2 heroes such as Kirito and Tatsuya are far harder to relate to than it is with Superman. In other words, the human side of a character is what makes him relatable, and the inhuman side is what excuses everything that feels out of place, thus gapping the space between reality and fiction. And that is why so many people can be crying over a moe blob that got sick and needs someone to help it. People say that they like some characters, but they almost never explain why exactly. Not so much because they are bored to do so, as they are unable to express it. For that purpose, I prepared a list of 7 features that can help you understand better why you like or dislike someone. The most superficial characteristic is the appearance of a character. It's when you like the design simply because it's sexy or moe or cool looking. After that comes behavior. It's when you like a character for the way he acts or his personality in general. And although there usually is an obvious connection to how a character looks with how he acts, there are cases where that is not happening, so these two can be considered separate features. Then we have the mentality. It's when we are shown how a character thinks. It's usually done with internal monologues, but there are cases when his actions show that clearly. And again, although it seems like how someone acts is always based on how he thinks, there are many cases where we are never given any insight to that. Combined with how irrelevant his appearance can be next to the way he looks and thinks, mentality is again a separate feature. Next comes the establishment. It's when we are shown why a character thinks the way he thinks. Many times it seems like he was born to be like that, and others because something drastic or shocking in his past experiences formed his way of thinking. It almost always happens with flashbacks or backdrops, but it can also be something as simple as everyday observations that slowly made him reach to such conclusions. And then we have the fleshing out. This doesn't have anything to do with the character directly, and yet it's making him look important based on how he treats others in the story. It's like he can have a lot of good features, but still needs to show them somehow, so we will get to know him. This is where the interaction with his environment comes in, where the themes of the story are explored based on what he does, how his relatives, allies, and opponents bring out what he is as they interact with him. And then we have the most unappreciated and hard to grasp for most feature, the character development. Most confuse it all the time with a character changing clothes, or getting older, or getting a power-up, or having his backdrop story revealed. Those have nothing to do with it. Development is something strictly limited to how a character changes the way he acts and the way he thinks, which is not only rare in the anime world, but it's also very hard to do properly without feeling like he's being rewritten instead of changing based on what is going on around him. Furthermore, most don't even like seeing their favorite characters changing, thus it ends up backfiring even when it's done right. Which is sad because that is what a truly mature story should aim to have, and yet the anime industry only cares to stretch a story as much as possible by not having any actual developments, or simply do a rushed short adaptation of a manga or novel where everything is messy and unresolved. And that is actually the last feature I will mention, and its name is catharsis. It's when a show ends with all the conflicts resolved and the characters having found their piece of heaven, or reaching to a point where there is no point to keep messing with the conflict, also known as dying. It's basically a solid end, with no loose ends, which also happens to be very rare in the anime world, since almost all shows end openly or very rushed and messy to the point the catharsis becomes a joke. And this includes reset endings, which negate everything that happened in the whole story. With all the features mentioned, a final thing that needs to be done is placing volume and weight on them, meaning how much you care about each one of them individually and then how much each one of them is present on a character. That is needed because, for example, you may not care about how sexy a girl looks and you're mostly interested in her character development, which can be non-existent. Now, many can argue that what you expect out of a character is irrelevant to what the creators aim for, which means that you shouldn't use your personal criteria but the ones the makers of a show used. Maybe they wanted to focus on the girl's boobs and didn't care to include character development, so from their perspective, she's an amazing character, she's your waifu, go out best girl. There is nothing bad in trusting the vision of the creator instead of having personal expectations, but it is also a lie if we say most viewers care about that. Shinji Ikari is exactly as his creator wanted him to be, and yet many hate him exactly for that. The Infinite Stratos bimbos are as shallow and generic as they get, with no real vision or purpose placed on them, and yet many love them exactly for that. Plus, if everybody trusted the vision of the creator and didn't have any personal demands, then all shows would be accessible to everyone, would be rated with a 10, and there wouldn't be demographics or even genres and categories. Everything would feel the same, and that is why it's completely stupid to think like that. You're supposed to be as biased as you like because you don't watch a show for the pleasure of the creator, but for your pleasure. And that counts even if you watch it just so you can analyze it. There is no universal checklist for what counts as good. Everybody has their own standards and expectations, sadly. Even the list of the 7 features I mentioned here is flexible, so it can adjust to personal tastes, or lack of. So you can remain as demanding and biased as you like. This video is only meant to help you visualize why you are, not to prevent you from being that and turn you to yet another social chameleon. Self-awareness is a personal journey. Everybody else can just put up signs for you to choose your path, and that is all they can do. A common trait most stories for the younger audience share is the concept of the power of friendship. It's when camaraderie gets treated as the most important ideal there is, and on paper that stands true. We humans are social creatures. We form societies and coexist with others, which in turn can help us create wonders. No matter how talented someone is, he'll be incapable to visualize anything without the support of others around him. The more people accept his ideas and plans, the more chances he has to achieve his goals. In fact, everything in our civilization and culture has been achieved thanks to the combined effort of countless of people. From building the pyramids to winning a football match, it's always about acceptance, tolerance, and teamwork that makes all that happen. There is still a big issue when it comes to the power of friendship, and it has to do with the way it is presented. Most of the times, it feels like a selfish desire instead of an interpersonal relationship. There are 2 major cases when this becomes evident. First example is during rescue missions. It's when one of the friends of the protagonist gets kidnapped and he goes to save him. Although it makes sense that you would help a friend in need, and the friend in question would most likely love to be freed anyways, it doesn't feel like friendship when it's presented as a one-dimensional fascination. You see, a good friend would help you if you want help. In cases where you have set your mind to achieve something that needs to be done solo and the other guy is chasing after you for years like an obsessed gay boyfriend, then the whole thing becomes complete nonsense. And that is exactly what happened in the case of Naruto and Sasuke. Okay, he's your friend, but you already have lots of childhood friends, as well as a mission to become the leader of your village. You threw all other people and priorities to the bin for a guy you only knew for a few months, who on top of everything else didn't even want your help, because it was his personal choice to join the dark side. And thus we get a case where the power of friendship feels ridiculous instead of inspiring. I understand how good friends will insist on helping you even if you think you don't need any, and especially when what you plan to do is self-destructive. But when that is done at the expense of your friends giving up on their goals just for you, it becomes self-contradictory in a way. They ruin their lives just to prevent you from ruining your life. The second example is the sudden power-ups a character gets out of nowhere because he has friends he cares for. The most notorious case of this is in Fairy Tail, where in basically every battle the protagonist is part of will find himself losing badly until he remembers he has friends he cares for, and that somehow makes him 10 times stronger. On paper this makes sense, and it's actually a very common trick military officers use to motivate their troops. You don't fight simply because your superiors ordered you, you fight to protect your loved ones, as well as for the future of your country. It's not about you or your superiors, it's about everything that you know and care for. This logic would be lovely if it was used as a constant in battles instead of a last-moment reminder, meaning it's plain ridiculous to have a guy fighting for his friends all along, but at the brink of death he somehow realizes that he cares even more than he thought, and this somehow makes him ignore all the injuries he had sustained and become even stronger than when he was fully healed. It is possible to get sudden boosts in speed and strength in such cases, by the way, and it has to do with the instinct of self-preservation. The body can ignore all restrictions if your life is at stake, and that can lead to some impressive feats that are performed almost unconsciously. But that sort of case, A, has nothing to do with friendship, and B, can just as easily find the opponent using the same excuse to also get boosts. Thus, no real advantage exists for either one of them. At this point, I want to point out that there is a case when friendship can feel plausible and well executed, and that is when it's used for what it really exists for: teamwork. It makes complete sense when you have a person who is unable to overcome a situation to seek aid from others, and with combined effort, managing to come out triumphant. And if fighting is involved, then have all the characters using organized attacks. Remember the first battles in Code Geass and how strategic they felt because they were using field tactics and planned strikes? That sort of thing was great, and it's a shame it got soon thrown away for retarded mecha power-ups with no strategy at all. Of course, down to it, the whole power of friendship thing is for children, and as such there is nothing bad in being unrealistic and childish, or nothing more than cool factor in seeing the battered hero doing a comeback and owning the cocky villain. But just imagine how much more educational and pragmatic it would be for the target audience if it was presented as it really is: overcoming obstacles with the help of others. So, a guy on Reddit reads my review of Akame ga Kill and tells me it's a fallacy to say the villains were pure evil. First of all, he used the wrong word. This is not called a fallacy, it's called a mistake. Second of all, there is not a mistake on my part, but rather on his part, if we go over what he said about the villains. Just unzip your pants, for here comes the joyride of exposing more idiocy. The Emperor is not completely evil. He has good intentions for his empire, but is otherwise manipulated by the Prime Minister. Before I say anything regarding that, let's clarify that he's not even a villain, you idiot. He's a passive secondary character. But for the sake of argument, let's pretend he is evil just because he is part of the evil faction, aka the authorities, the most overused source for hating something in shonen. So, according to him, he's not completely evil because his intentions are good. Bullshit! Intentions mean nothing, only actions matter, and in this case he's just doing whatever the Prime Minister is telling him to do. And guess what, my lovely? They are always orders for doing all forms of evil acts. You can say that he's a tragic character because of it, but you can't say he's good or even grey because of good intentions. I'm pretty sure Hitler had very good intentions for the people of Germany. Does that make his actions good or him a grey character? Nope, he was pitch black evil, not simply because he is constantly presented in movies as a monster, but because no intention can morally justify the mass extermination of all races but his own. You can claim that we say that only because Germany lost the war. If it had won, we would now be saying, oh, it was the best thing in human history. Well, too bad it lost. Too bad it caused uncountable damages to the whole planet. And too bad his intentions didn't prove to be beneficial after all. Did I go too far by mentioning history? Let me give you a simpler example from fiction. I am pretty sure when Reiki Kawahara was writing Sword Art Online, he just wanted to create a nice story about relationships in virtual reality and the effects of MMOs on the mentality of its players. But does the final product feel like that, No, it doesn't. It's just pandering for gamers, objectification of women, and promoting the act of trapping, torturing, and killing thousands of people as a heroic act. So to hell with good intentions, what a character thinks he is doing is irrelevant to what he is actually doing. Nothing the Emperor did counts as good, and nothing makes him a grey character. The idiot proceeds into mentioning other villains in Akame ga Kill and why they aren't completely evil. His examples boil down to how they simply do their duty in serving the Empire. So from their perspective, they are partially good for trying to protect the authorities, even if said authorities are the cause of all this mess. So basically, they are on the side of justice, because they uphold the laws which are established by the government, which includes the arch-villain of the show. For the same reason, the good guys are not completely good, since they go against the laws and the authorities. What drives their actions is a personal code of honor, or a form of morality which has nothing to do with what the government wants, but with what they want a society to be like. With this logic, both heroes and villains are grey because they basically do everything for honor and ideals, and the only difference being if they support the status quo or if they don't support the status quo.
And here is the big mistake he and the creator of the show did. Justice has absolutely nothing to do with goodness. Laws exist simply to sustain a society by establishing how its members must behave, what is allowed and what is not allowed, so they can coexist peacefully. Morality has nothing to do with all that. Any law can feel unfair and yet is justified simply because it is established. Being lawful does not make someone good. It makes him obedient, safe, controllable. It's someone you can trust easier and coexist without worries. Committing crimes does not make someone evil either. It makes him unpredictable, chaotic, harmful to society. It's a person you will never be sure if he will harm you for personal gain. Honor and by extension morality exist outside of justice and laws. They are meaningful only on a personal level and dictate one's beliefs or way of living. That is why you can never justify the punishment of someone who doesn't have the same moral values as you do. You can punish him for being harmful to society based on the existing laws, but not because he has no honor. For this reason, any actions the villains do in the show are not good or bad. They are simply justified. They are not good, bad, or something in between of those two. They don't have such traits. They are completely neutral. It's the same thing as soldiers of an opposing army. You cannot call them evil for following orders. They are just serving their country. You can only accuse them if they do stuff which are not officially permitted by the laws of their country. And although everything is allowed in war, since the only thing that matters is winning, it still doesn't excuse actions that were made against the official conduct of an army. That is why the term war criminal exists and why so many military officers are sent to court after a war is over. Serving their country and going against the laws of their country are two completely different things which don't justify anything they do simply because it promotes the interests of their faction. Thus, justice and morality do not mix. Most mix them for making it seem like they are on the side of goodness and thus they excuse their actions. Yet it isn't so and it always comes down to one or the other. Following commands that came from an authority other than yourself, thus making your actions neutral, those would be the Jaegers. Or doing what your personal moral values are dictating, thus making your actions good for everyone else who shares the same values, or bad for anyone who doesn't share the same values, and those would be the Night Raid members. With this logic, grey morality exists only when there is a conflict regarding morality values amongst many people. There is no such thing as a morally grey character who does bad things for a good cause. There are only different interpretations of his actions, something which is done by others, not himself. If he has an internal conflict, he is not grey, he is confused, for not knowing which values he needs to choose. And also, how can we even call anything in a Kamiga Kill to be remotely grey when it's pretty obvious to the viewer who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? A morally grey situation is supposed to present both sides as equally just or good from their point of view. And that is why, once again, Legend of the Galactic Heroes did this right, since neither the Empire or the Federation are presented as obviously good or bad to the audience. And although Code Geass stole that idea, it's very easy to see how they didn't bother to make anything actually grey. Oh geez, I wonder who is right here, the heroic rebels who are fighting for the freedom of their nation, or the douchebag fascist Imperials. What's that? Lelouch is an anti-hero with grey morality? Sure, it's not like he killed billions of people and brainwashed thousands more just to make his sister the ruler of the whole planet. He clearly did it for the good of humanity. Bullshit! By the way, justice can have lots of things in common with goodness, it's just not necessary to be so. Laws are often seen as what good people should be doing depending on what policy its leaders are following. This is why smoking was considered a cool and manly thing to do a few decades ago, but now is seen as harmful and is forbidden in many public areas. This is why slavery and public executions are no longer allowed in first world countries. It's still very easy to blur morality and law, and in many cases you are just going with what your guts are telling you to do. But as I said in the previous video, good intentions have nothing to do with what someone is actually doing. All it matters is if it was legal or justified based on the existing laws. Continuing the bullshit some guys said about the Kamiga Kill, we now get to how he defends madmen for being grey just because they are insane. Such as saying the Prime Minister is the source of all evil in the show, thus is excused to be a one-dimensional caricature of a villain who loves to kill and torture people just because. It's cool to have an arch-villain who has no soft side, right? It's someone you would love to hate. That would be nice if he was the only one acting like that. But then you see how every single one-episode villain is exactly the same. If the goal of the good guys is to kill this guy, they have technically killed 1,000 ones like him. It gets boring very fast, and by the time they kill the prototype, you will not care anymore. They have been doing the exact same thing in every episode. All insane villains have this problem. Their only feature is being crazy and violent for no logical reason. Thus, they are flat. The Joker in Batman is as good as this archetype can get, just because it combines a dozen gimmicks, from eccentric behavior, elaborate master plans, black humor, and an appearance that is ironic in what it represents. This does not happen with the villains in Akame ga Kill. They are all the same archetype, with different face and no extra gimmicks to set them apart. And even if they had gimmicks, there is still nothing you can do with them, exactly because they are insane. You cannot reason with them, you cannot reform them, you cannot trust them, and in general, you cannot develop them as characters. They are stuck to being flat bad guys you wish to see them die. Or if you have sadistic tendencies, you expect them to do some really sickening things to innocent people. And even if you go for the latter, it can't remain entertaining after 3 or 4 times. Of course, the Land of the Rising Sun found a nice trick to make insane characters appealing for much longer. And by that, I mean Yanderers. You know the archetype, the completely fucked up in the head, overpowered slut that is obsessed with the pussy protagonist and does all sorts of insane shit to people on one hand, while being all cute and blushing when she is next to a blunt guy with no personality, whom she loves for no real reason. That sort of characters can slaughter puppies and drink the blood of babies without ever feeling evil to the majority of the creepy otakus. Why? Because they had a sad past and nobody loved them. Plus the protagonist is left deliberately blank, so you can self-insert yourself and think those crazy bitches love you. Needless to say, such characters are just a deviant fetish and have nothing that can deem them tragic. No matter how much they try to make their backdrop stories to be full of misery as an attempt to excuse their insanity, nothing can possibly excuse all the death and destruction they cause because of a one-sided sexual attraction. So please, enough with the bullshit of trying to make crazy characters to seem likable. They are completely insane and excuse anything they do with morals that have nothing to do with the society they are living in. When Seiryu is talking about justice while slaughtering people with a manic laugh, she is not being just or grey or someone to be pitied. She is an irredeemable villain who deserves to die. Madness is not a positive trait. It kills development and interest. And if you seriously want a yandere as a girlfriend, you're insane too! Machiavelli was a 15th century politician whose way of thinking became the name of a trait for all those who think like him. A Machiavellian character is someone who believes that the end justifies the means. Everything is justified if it gets you what you want. By the way, this is not exactly what Machiavelli meant, but that is how it is perceived today. A completely immoral way of thinking, since according to most morality standards, it doesn't matter if you win, it only matters how you won. History may be written by the winners, but that doesn't excuse any mistakes or atrocities they committed in the name of the greater good. And the reason is simple. It stops being good the moment you think like that. If I use a very simple example, it's like doping in sports. It's so good when you win by basically cheating. Everybody loves you for being the winner. You are famous, you're rich. Movies are made about you, and you become inspiration for the new generation. But if, for whatever reason, they ever find out you are doping, well, too bad. Now everybody will hate you because not only you were cheating, but also because you fooled them to believe that you were winning by playing fair. It was supposed to be guts and hard working that got you to the top, not bending the rules. It's fine if you think you can forever hide the truth, but come on, nothing's hidden under the sun. Eventually you will be caught, and everything you achieved will be a disgrace, not only for you, but also for everyone who believed in you. The Sibyl system is a Machiavellian character. The first season fooled many to think it's not good or bad, it's a completely impartial form of government that judges all people based on specific standards and not based on personal portfolio. Of course, if you think about it, it's obviously judging based on a personal portfolio, since all the standards were established by itself. Sibyl is the one who wrote the rules. It can't get more personal than that. It also aims to establish itself as the form of government used in the rest of the world. Thus the whole thing is essentially about world domination. That sounds like a portfolio to me. And what is even worse is that the second season proved it doesn't follow its own rules all the time. Thus it's not even impartial as the first season wanted you to believe. Episode 9 of season 2 is the point where there is no more excuses of how evil it is. They killed that imprisoned doctor her because he knew too much, blamed someone else for it, tried to drive Akane insane so they can kill her too, and just in case all the above were not enough to convince everyone, they even included a flashback where they teach a little boy how to slaughter cute puppies, while smirking sardonically on top of all that. That is the moment everybody realizes, holy shit, Sybil is a fucking monster. Of course it is! It always was, and I knew it all along since I'm not stupid. But in this episode, the pretense simply collapses and the true colors become apparent for even the dumbest person to get it. Puppies, anyone? And the same thing can be said about the main antagonist of the second season, Kirito, who kills people with video games. Oh snap, what does that remind me of? He's also a Machiavellian character, since whatever he does is not for some greater good. He may pretend that he wants to liberate the city from Sybil, but come on, the whole thing is essentially about revenge for what they did to him. Also, the things he did in order to get his revenge are simply despicable. He killed dozens of innocent civilians so he can replace them with his fanatic supporters. He killed dozens more just to test how the Dominators work. He drove dozens more insane by making them kill people while thinking they were playing an innocent game. He helped sadistic company presidents to hide their clouded hues so they can torture people. He then fooled them into eating human flesh, meaning he killed, dissected, and cooked people for that sole purpose, so he can kill them all when he no longer needs them. As for their victims, he doesn't simply offer them a merciful, painless death. Oh no, sir, he burns them alive, slowly and painfully. Does anyone even care if he destroys Sybil after all that? He's as evil as they are. Bottom line, Machiavellian characters are never good characters, no matter how much they try to make it seem like what they are doing is for the greater good. They are usually very cool villains, but they are never good as far as intentions go, and even if they get what they want in the end, their victories are hollow and despicable. Let me offer you a few more examples, just in case you didn't realize it yet. Emiga Kiritsugu in Fate Zero, Yagami Light in Death Note, Lelouch v Britannia in Code Geass, and Ash Ketchum in Pokemon. Seriously, he is capturing innocent animals and brainwashing them so they will fight for you while presenting the whole thing like it's friendship is plain evil.
Despite sounding like a negative trait, arrogance exists to show how a character has conviction in whatever he is doing. Saying he will do his best doesn't sound as reassuring as when he is certain that he will win. When a villain is gloating about his superiority, he's not simply being an asshole that is too full of himself. He is also seeking for affirmation from his enemies. If he doesn't do that, his victory will be hollow. Simply killing his enemies is not enough, he also needs to crush their hopes, so they will never try to mess with him again. Arrogance, of course, can be used against the character when he's underestimating his opponents. An overused cliché is having the villain gloating instead of shooting the hero, which gives more than enough time for the hero to prepare a counterattack. This is extra silly when it's accompanied by having the villain revealing his evil master plan, something that could have been shown instead of being told, thus becoming lazy writing on part of the author. Meaning arrogance is not that far away from stupidity, and it's the downfall of most bad guys in fiction. From a utility perspective, arrogance is essentially a way to stall time. Of course, when someone can crush his opponent right away instead of gloating first, he can simply not say anything, be modest in his speech, and still be certain of his victory in his mind, which is the perfect winning mentality. But that tends to make a character boring in the eyes of the viewer. We want to see him being in doubt of his capabilities, and having to say it, working not as simply convincing others around him, but also to constantly keep doubts away by reassuring himself. Thus, although it can be very frustrating when a story that can end in a few minutes is instead stretched to hundreds of episodes, just because both parties are showing off, it can also be anticlimactic if it doesn't last long enough for the victory to feel satisfactory by taking too long to achieve it. It all depends on the viewer's engagement. If he gets bored with how long it takes for something to be resolved, then arrogance is a waste of time. If on the other hand he considers the arrogance as a form of a build-up or a display of winning before actually winning, then it multiplies the effects of the satisfaction in the finale. This is actually the running joke of One Punch Man. The bad guys keep gloating about being undefeatable, and then the protagonist beats them with one punch. The other heroes are constantly reassuring the population that they can protect them, and then the villain beats them with one punch. Everything seems to be a build-up for a huge arc, only to end 10 minutes later. The whole show is built around making fun of the predisposition of arrogance and the expectations of the audience. It gets old fast by repeating the same joke, but it's otherwise the perfect satire of overestimating one's capabilities. character archetypes and how I categorize them based on how people usually change their tastes as they get older or bored with earlier types. Also, I will limit them to how males think, since I don't get women and their love for yaoi. Anyways, the archetype all of us begin with when we are still babies is what I call the Boy Scout. They are basically the heroes in fairy tales, such as the noble prince or the kind-hearted poor girl. You can also include any cartoon that is aimed at very young children, like Dora the Explorer. These characters are picture perfect and always do the right thing, so a moral message can come out of it at the end. In other words, it is the stuff our parents show us while our brains are still accepting anything we see. It's part of social programming, where we are taught what is good and moral, so we too will behave in a good and moral manner. They are teaching us how to be nice to other people. The bad part about it is that it's freaking boring. They are flat and predictable, so you don't get any enjoyment out of them as characters. Maybe you get some out of the silly things they do, although that makes the slapstick animation more important than the actual characters. For example, I love the DuckTales. It is one of my favorite cartoons, but I didn't like it as much for the actual characters as I did for the adventures they were heading for, and all the cool stuff that was going on. The setting, the action, and the humor were what I really cared for, not the ducks. Thus comes the time when we are in junior high and we don't want any more of that boring stuff. They feel like nonsense we need to learn because school said so. But we don't want to do anything the teachers or our parents tell us. They are pushy and meany and we just want to have fun. So we start looking for stories where things are more chaotic and not so pure. This is what we find in the anti-hero archetype. A complete contrast with the Boy Scout. This one is flawed. He makes bad and naughty things without necessarily learning something out of them. It is any show with a rebellious teenager who doesn't listen to the evil adults and who lies, cheats, looks under girls' skirts and has lots of fun while breaking the rules. And that is your average fighting shonen protagonist in a nutshell. An idol for what we want to be, not what our parents and teachers want us to be. That is after all the reason why most of the times parents and teachers are absent in such shows. Then comes the time we get to high school, where all of a sudden we don't like these silly anti-heroes anymore. We find them to be stupid and childish. Look at them yelling for trying to be the best whatevers in the world. And looking under girls' skirts. What are you, 12? Well, too bad. Now I'm 13. I'm a man. Now we are big boys and we like more extreme stuff. So, depending on what kind of a big boy you are, you will choose one of the three following archetypes. If you dig violence and big boobs, you will go for the OP archetype. You will love your unbeatable at everything dudes, smacking the crap out of one-dimensional villains and grabbing the ass of every female they come across, who of course will love them on first sight for their awesomeness. If, on the other hand, you don't feel that positive of yourself, you will go for the wimp archetype. It will be some frail, unmotivated four-eyes who gets bullied all the time and likes video games or plastic figurines and will be unable to talk to girls. But for some reason, all the chicks love him for his pure heart. In other words, a harem lead. And if you feel like all this violence and boobs in your face are retarded, you will go for the pacifist archetype. Someone who is powerful, but doesn't use his skills to harm others, but rather to protect them from strife. It's someone who understands that wars have consequences that scar people not only physically, but also mentally. It is someone who will try to solve his problems using common sense and dialogue. And if that fails, he can still use force if he is cornered, but he won't enjoy it. He is a noble warrior with a gentle heart and ruthless fighting skills, which he never lets to get the best of him because he has clarity of mind. And then you get to college and you realize all those heroes are shallow. It feels like you can describe them with a one-liner, so you want more out of them. The wimp archetype is the easiest to see where it's heading. Why keep the loser being a loser and not be super special, Only he will be able to save the world with a unique superpower that has to do with his dorky hobby, and have all the chicks at the same time. Meaning he becomes an OP himself, where being a geek is super amazing. The vanilla OP, in the meantime, can be refined into the Byronic, a type of hero who is using his brains more than his bronze, and who is also wronged by society, so there is actually some sort of social drama going on about him to make him interesting. His actions are now more mental. He works from the shadows and hits below the belt when you least expect it. He's sort of a criminal mastermind, with usually good intentions for those he cares about and self-destructive tendencies towards those who messed with him. As for the pacifist, he evolves into a more selfish person as the losses start to pile. You see, being in favor of peace is nice, but that is just an ideal. If the world around you is going to hell and you can't protect those you love or even yourself, then you get the psychologically damaged archetype. Someone who is affected by the death and destruction around him and doesn't treat devastation simply as, oh, a few buildings collapsed and a few dozen people died. War is bad, isn't it?
His very mind is affected to the point he is mentally unstable and unpredictable. This is when you get shows where characters do stupid things all the time, and it can always be excused as, hey, they're crazy teenagers, so yeah. There is even a passive form for the psychologically damaged archetype known as the dere. It involves the usual female archetypes we see in many shows, like the tsundere, the kuldere, and the yandere. They are unable to help themselves get over their issues without a guy helping them out, and then wanting his dick as reward. Meaning they become a sort of prize for the wimp archetype, because females are always fate's stay kitchen. As for a male refinement of the psychologically damaged archetype, we get the cynical archetype. This is a fairly new fad which came around the beginning of the 21st century. Ideals and fun lost their meaning after 9/11 made the Americans grumpy, and video games turned to mostly first-person shooters where emotionless soldiers shoot at each other. That is the cynical, someone who just doesn't care anymore. He has no ideals, he doesn't really worry about the death of others, and focuses completely on his task. He is completely desensitized. It is appealing for all those who got tired of characters crying in a corner for hours, not pressing the trigger when they should, having doubts over the most obvious of things, and in general, not getting straight to the point and get shit done with no drama or sidestepping. Well, that makes them practical, I guess, but also hard to care for exactly because they have no emotions. Everything in such shows feels cold, distant, and nothing more than a plot device. Yes, you guessed it, I was talking about Urabucher again. At this point, the only thing I can think of that can refine both the Byronic and cynical archetypes is the mentor. Someone who moved past his earthly desires and gained true wisdom. He is someone who perfected his brain chakra, sort of speaking. He accepts the world as it is and opposes only those who try to ruin its balance for personal profit. He's not that interesting as a character because his development has been perfected and there is nothing for him to move forward. You can respect what he knows and has achieved, but interesting he is not. Ironically, he can be an advisor to all previous archetypes, but he mostly has success with the Boy Scout back in the beginning, since that idiot will believe anything you tell him. And with that, we reach a full circle where the older generation guides the new one. The end. You can check this nifty relation chart to get the full picture. I am sure there are far more archetypes I could include, but that would be overkill. I am also sure many of you are still loving Naruto, even if you're over 20 instead of watching something meaningful like Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Shame. Also, not all characters fit in only one of these types, since some can be a combination of things, so don't assume everyone fits in only one spot. I needed a new target and look what I chose! It's time to prove to you all why Psychopass is complete garbage in storytelling and script. Let's start with the term of the outsider. Any character who, for whatever reason, is distant from whatever is going on with the setting or the plot. There are 4 types of outsiders, with the first one being the lobotomized Askman. It's when a character, usually the protagonist, is constantly asking questions about what is going on around him. In Psychopass, this task is given to Akane, our dear old police investigator, who starts working without knowing a fucking thing regarding her job. Seriously, she's sent to hunt criminals without even knowing what a gun is or how the scanners look? The setting is constantly trying to excuse it as people not knowing anything because they live in bliss and have no idea of what the hell is going on in their own neighborhood. It is a good trick to have someone in constant need of an info dump, so the audience can also find out what the hell is going on with this stupid psychopath. Of course, it's still completely retarded once you realize someone needs to be told how to open a door, or how to walk down the street, or how to do things that you should be taught before being thrown into criminal cases. Akane is a stranger in her own society, and just like all Urobucher shows, she's not a character, she's a plot device that exists not to be proactive and do something with the plot. Oh no, sir! She's there as a passive observer who asks questions so the viewer can understand how her society works. And she fails even on that because it's all fucking bullshit. The second type is the proper version of the previous one, and it's called the fish out of water. In 12 Kingdoms, for example, our heroine Yuko is transported to a bizarre magical world that works in a very different way than our own. It's very natural to ask for information, so she can understand how things work around here. The info dumping is excused because she indeed doesn't know anything. She hasn't been living all her life in a place without even knowing the basics. And she's also doing far more than asking. By the time her arc was over, she changed a lot of things. She herself was a different person. The third type is the Ghost. It's someone who is simply immune to the laws of the setting he is in. He can do whatever he likes and get away with it because he's magically untouchable. And that is the case with the main villains of Psychopaths, who have this special power that makes them immune to the Dominators. They can do any crime they want and the justice system can't judge them. At the same time, they are pretentious enough to throw around monologues in a lazy attempt to teach the rest of the characters, as well as the audience, some bullshit moral message. There is nothing more insulting than expecting a guy to teach you something that he has no idea what the fuck he is talking about. How the hell can you learn about the addiction to drugs by a guy who magically never gets high? How can an emotionless alien cat talk about emotions when it doesn't even feel emotions? How can a machine talk about ethics when it doesn't feel remorse? This is exactly what the villains in Psychopaths, as well as in every other Uro Butcher show, are doing. They talk about flaws in a system that doesn't work only for very peculiar circumstances no normal person can ever hope to encounter. So it's all horseshit when they are trying to tell you the setting is a dystopia when its loopholes apply only to a handful of individuals. The fourth and last type is the proper version of the Ghost, and it's called the Mentor. It's someone who knows a lot and teaches both the characters and the audience about important stuff without ever being distant from the world he is talking about. Take Ginkgo from Mushishi, for example. He constantly travels to different places, and he is always a stranger to anyone he encounters. But when he explains to others how those weird creatures are doing whatever they are doing, he can still fall victim to them. He is still part of the world, and he can still affect it and be affected by it. It's not a one-way relation compared to the fucking Ghost. So there you have it. With simple examples, I proved without a doubt why exposition and moral messages in Psychopaths are pure garbage. There are hundreds of different archetypes when it comes to opponents a protagonist needs to face in a story. Mad scientists, cruel dictators, alien invaders, and so on. All those archetypes can be grouped into 4 categories depending on how the story is handling them. Let's go over each one of them and see which one is the best. Number 1. The bad guy. This is the most common, overused, and least interesting of the 4 kinds. It labels the opponent as bad, thus he deserves to be beaten by the protagonist, who is almost always labeled as good. There is nothing to ponder about this kind. It is fairly straightforward, as it simplifies everything down to black and white. Almost feels like propaganda, actually, for demonizing the opponent in the eyes of the viewer. Of course, many stories eventually flesh out the opponents in order to make them more sympathetic, but when that happens, they cease being bad guys and become part of the following kind. Number 2. The rival. Unlike a bad guy, who is the opposite of the protagonist, the rival is very similar to him. He's part of the same faction and has the same goals. This makes the conflict far more interesting, since the opponent is not presented as someone who is meant to be hated for aiming to destroy whatever the protagonist wants, but rather as someone who wants what the protagonist seeks for himself. Depending on the outcome, he can become an ally of the protagonist, or even a bad guy who wants to avenge him for losing the goal. Number 3. The unknown. As the name suggests, this type is a mystery. Aside from opposing the protagonist, nothing else is known about him. Who is he? What he wants? For what reason? All are left in the dark until late in the story. Such opponents are usually the most thrilling and exciting, since you are constantly teased to figure out the answer. They are also usually the most disappointing ones during the showdown. After everything about them is revealed, they don't feel cool anymore. In fact, in most cases, they are pathetic and petty. Turns out that the mystery was the only thing which was making them seem special, and not their motives or actions. Number 4. The Dark Ego. While the other types had an external opponent, here he is internal. He is usually the representation of the negative feelings and thoughts of the protagonist, effectively making the hero to be his own worst enemy. He is usually the hardest to beat as well, since raw force and intelligence don't work on him. He is also impossible to be beaten completely and permanently, since he is constantly an inseparable part of the protagonist's mind. The problem with this type is that most of the times, the authors make him jump out of the mind of the protagonist. He ceases to be a dark ego and evolves to a separate physical being, a defeatable and simplified bad guy. Other times, there is simply a villain who represents everything the protagonist does and wants to be. In other words, an evil counterpart. All it takes is to beat this guy as means to defeat his inner demons. It's better than the first alternative, but it still makes it seem like his guilt and fears just fizzle away just like that. From this breakdown, I say the best type is the rival. Unlike the bad guy, he keeps things grey. Unlike the unknown, he doesn't become lame. And unlike the dark ego, he can still attack the protagonist mentally, making him doubt and feeling down by just being himself and standing in his way.
There are anime where, despite having many characters, only one of them stands out for being essentially the only one who matters plot-wise, and also the one doing something better than everybody else combined. In most anime, the protagonist is not that person. He's more like a proxy for the viewer, generic and forgettable. The ones standing out are the quirky people surrounding him. In many classic action series, that person was the anti-hero. The lone wolf who is distant and sad and is willing to do a lot of despicable things none of the other heroes would ever dare to do. In comedies, that person is the most eccentric in behavior, who has the most extreme or bizarre emotional reactions. If you have an anime with normal people and an emotionless girl, the emotionless girl will probably be the only one you will end up remembering. If you have the emotionless girl and a tsundere, the tsundere will stand out. Is there a yandere somewhere in there? The yandere will stand out. Is there a delusional otaku saying and doing stuff most of the target audience is fond of? Guess who stands out? The reason this happens is because said characters don't seem to fit with everything else that is going on in the series. I talked about uniformity a few videos ago, and what a surprise! You can have everything fitting into place perfectly, and they still get to be overshadowed by a single completely alien element. There are still cases when the protagonist gets to be the one standing out, but not because he's doing everything better, as I said in the beginning, but rather because his mentality is completely different from everybody else's. So the alien element that has no uniformity ends up defining the entire show, usually because it is questioning its status quo. It feels sort of rebellious, revolutionary, and thought-provoking, although it can easily pass as self-indulgent, autistic, the world is wrong and only I know what is right type of behavior. That can end up being obnoxious in case you don't like someone being against everything and everyone. So essentially we have four kinds of standouts: the overpowered, who does everything better than everybody else, the anti-hero, who does everything the hero doesn't, the eccentric companion, who does things nobody else does in general, and the rebel, who goes against everything the show is about at first. You can like the anti-hero most than the rest, or you can be wrong. The truth has been spoken. Bullies belong in the laziest types of adversaries, yet even they can be separated into types. The worst type is the sadist bully, the one who bullies others just because he gets pleasure from seeing them suffer. They are meant to be hated right away by the audience and have no redeeming qualities. They are lazily written, awfully handled, and exist just so the hero can kick their asses and promote whatever agenda he has. The second worst is the inferiority complex bully, someone who feels bad about himself and pests others so he can feel better by treating them worse than he feels about himself. The only thing that makes him slightly better than the first category is how there is room for character development once he is beaten and ridiculed. Most of the times this does not happen, and he is used as nothing more than an obstacle for the protagonist on his way to become the best. The third worst is the strict mentor. It is usually a teacher or the father of the protagonist who is constantly tormenting him as means to toughen him up or teach him something the hard way. If used properly, it can be seen as harsh love, someone who seems to be evil when in reality he only wants the best out of the protagonist. If used lazily, it is needless misery porn. And the best of the bunch is the spoiled bully. It's someone who feels he belongs in the elite and treats others badly because they are not as good as he is. If used properly, he can be an upperclassman who enjoys sportsmanship and challenge. He motivates others into improving so they can get as good as he is. If he is beaten and ridiculed, he is not going to feel bad, but rather will accept the opponent as someone equal or better than him. He will show respect and camaraderie thereafter because others proved worthy of a better treatment. If used lazily, he becomes a sore loser, someone who doesn't want anyone to challenge him and will cheat if necessary to stay at the top. He devolves into the inferiority complex bully, someone who fakes superiority when in reality he feels bad about himself. It's easy to understand why a story needs protagonists, antagonists, and villains.
It becomes a bit more complicating when it comes to those minor characters in the background, which don't do anything major and offer close to no contribution to the plot. They may seem unimportant, and yet you can't have a good story without them. For example, take importance. It is cool if your protagonist can fly and shoot fireballs, but it doesn't feel special if most others in the series can do that as well. This is why you need to have some mundane people who don't have special powers, or their powers are not as powerful or are not as special as the protagonist. This of course works only when your protagonist is some superhero or messiah. In many cases he is not. He is mundane or way weaker than those around him. In such a case you still need minor characters just so you can learn about him. Whatever personality the protagonist has can be shown by the way he interacts with others around him. Talking to yourself or having internal monologues can work as well, but it is very one-sided and usually nothing more than self-indulgence. The way to see how practical those thoughts are is by externalizing them and seeing how they work for other people. This interaction is not just about externalizing the protagonist's personality, it is also about developing it from what he learns from said interaction. Meaning minor characters are needed for character progression, things not limited to generic stuff like trying to get stronger and beat the bad guy. Even if they don't contribute to the protagonist's growth, minor characters are still very important for world building. The more you have of them, the more colorful and diverse the setting feels. They flesh out background details and make things feel livelier. They may not further the plot, but still give you more angles to look at the themes of a show. They are also a less lazy way to offer info dumping during fights. You know, those times where the protagonist does something and the spectators will explain what just happened, even if it's plain obvious, but done regardless, in case some in the audience are too stupid to get it. It feels a bit less forced when it's not the protagonist who needs to pause the fight and explain what he just did, but rather those who don't directly know what happened and need someone next to them to explain it. It's still silly, but minimizes the damage. Minor characters are also important as relaxation points. They are not important to the story, thus the more time is spent on them, the less fast the progression of the main plot is. That may sound like it's a negative thing, but it's not if it's handled properly. Series that are always about trying to beat the bad guy or becoming the best in some sport, or trying to win a girl, become tiresome from a point on because they are doing the same thing all the time. How can you find the time to get to know the protagonists if they are constantly pressing forward? You can't until they take a break and start interacting with others. Also, the more time it takes to accomplish something, the harder and more important it feels when you eventually accomplish it. Thus, slowing things down and spending time in introspection makes the payoff far more worthwhile. In a similar fashion with the above, the more minor characters you have, the less convenient the whole thing feels. If every character is vital, then they all feel like plot devices that the scriptwriter placed there for a specific reason. If the roles they fulfill are too obvious, then no matter what they do will feel staged. You need to blur their importance by placing a lot of unimportant characters in between. Of course, any of these reasons can be abused or treated in a way that can ruin a show, but they are still good reasons of why you need minor characters. If you make a checklist of a show, the more positive usage they have, the better the show feels altogether. In a medium where 90% of major characters are teenagers, parents end up having a backseat because they would normally stand in the way. I mean, what kind of a parent would let his children be part of a fraction of the crazy stuff you see in an average anime? They would call the cops, or the army, or a shrink. It's a huge pain in the butt to have a story that is full of action, danger, and in general illegal situations, with your mom constantly telling you you're grounded until you clean your room. It goes against the whole empowerment fantasy aspect by keeping everything safe and mundane, which is why quite often parents in fiction are dead. If your protagonist is an orphan, not only you instantly make him 10 times more tragic and sympathetic for not having someone to love him as he grows up, you also allow him to run free in crazy adventures full of action, danger, and in general illegal situations no parent would normally allow him to be part of. You don't want your character to be a tragic orphan, but rather a self-insert average high school kid that somehow gets thrown in a world full of crazy situations? No problem, just have his parents being alive, yet absent throughout the series. They could be on a business trip, leaving him alone at home, or he could be living in a dorm far away from home at a place where lots of crazy things are happening that his parents have no idea of. Now you keep him normal and relatable, while also excusing where he gets all the money to support his comfortable lifestyle that often includes trendy clothes, video games and manga. There is also the option of parents being around and aware of what is going on, but it can only work if they are in favor of the whole situation, meaning the setting needs to be crazy as a whole, and they need to be part of it, passing the torch to the next generation in a natural way from where they are standing. Mothers in this case act as emotional supporters who comfort their children every time they are down, meaning they have a purely passive role and are never contributing something vital to the whole. In some cases they abuse the power of love for creating some ultimate attack, but that becomes very contrived and should be avoided at all costs. Fathers, on the other hand, when they are in favor of the whole situation, they function most of the times as role models or the ultimate challenge for the protagonist, since they are the best at what they are doing and their sons are constantly trying to surpass them. So essentially they are a plot device, since on one hand they are an objective, and on the other they cannot be part of the plot since they will be easily defeating every enemy and constantly stealing the spotlight from their sons, who are supposed to be the protagonists.
Very few shows bother with character development since it's hard to pull it off and many viewers get butthurt when their favorite heroes and enemies change personalities. What most mangaka do is changing the role of a character in every following arc. What triggers the change, as well as the importance of a character in the story or the focus he receives, is a change in the status quo. When a major character dies or is incapacitated, a huge vacancy is formed that needs to be somehow filled. That's when the less important characters get more focus and become more important. The opposite effect can happen as well. When a new character is introduced, he takes over the role of an older character. In fact, it's a standard method of keeping things fresh, by constantly introducing more characters that replace the importance of older ones. If they don't, they are a worthless addition, since everybody's going to be complaining about not seeing the older and more interesting guys. Changing roles is also something that happens automatically, even when you don't change the status quo or introduce more characters. If a character never develops, he can only stay interesting for a certain amount of time before becoming boring by repeating the same stuff all the time. In a series with an ongoing plot, this becomes even more apparent when the author has no idea of what to do with someone after the reason he was introduced is over. He usually leaves them as worthless background decoration that is taking up space and screen time without contributing in any way. They essentially become a filler. The logical thing to do with such characters is to kill them off, or at least keep them in a faraway place so they will never be seen again. This way you remove the worthless ones and keep the important ones. Unfortunately, this is something not many mangaka are doing. They use every character as a marketing ploy and an excuse to sell merchandise. The bigger the cast, the more merchandise you can sell. And it's not like the audience cares much about this obvious exploitation, so the mangaka have no reason to stop doing it. Your average shonen fan finds huge numbers of characters to be amazing, and even somehow thinks they are good world building. He even uses them as an excuse to write fanfiction, or ship his favorite characters, or have an endless number of what-if battles. He doesn't care about quality, the more the merrier. But you know what? Even when characters are regressing from major roles to background decoration, it is still not as bad as when they get back their initial roles and everything goes back to exactly how things were in the beginning. It's like there was no plot, everybody got amnesia, everything got a time reset, and nothing really changed. Maintaining the status quo is the biggest fuck you there is. The last episode of Kumamiko caused a shitstorm in the community. The running joke of the series was about the social anxiety of a girl who knew nothing about the modern world. It was poking fun of the otakus being antisocial stereotype, and following the same premise of Watamote, the heroine was trying to get over her problems and become part of a larger society. The thing is, the show kept being more and more vicious about it, making everybody exploiting and pressuring her to try harder to the point it became torture. In the final episode, she essentially snaps and reverts back to a childlike behavior, unwilling to leave the safety of her village and metaphorically embracing her antisocial life. The ending is essentially a reset that maintains the status quo by undoing all her progress through a sort of amnesia. This is not the first time an anime ended like that, but it's definitely the first when so many people were furious. In this case, it was the society that actively pressured the heroine into snapping and afterwards acted as if nothing had happened. In the other shows, there was no outside interference. The characters were isolated in a little fictional world and were essentially sabotaging themselves. It was a personal struggle that did not affect anyone around them, nor did anyone else seem to notice or care about it. Basically, the ending is a terrible case of tonal whiplash. It's funny while it's just chuny people doing silly things, and it's terrible when there are consequences in the real world. It's no longer about poking fun at escapism, especially when the rest of the world treats you badly and expects you to work hard, not for yourself, but for the agenda of the community, and then refuses to accept responsibility for driving you over the edge. Adding to this how oversensitive modern fans are at losing their shit when they don't get an ideal ending, and you get laughable repercussions, such as the writer of the show deleting his Twitter account, as well as attempting to remove his name from the Wikipedia article concerning the series. This is essentially poetic justice, as it mirrors what happened in the series. The society attacks the writer as repercussions for his actions, and in response he crawls into a hole and acts like he wants nothing to do with it anymore. Man children making fun of man children, because the status quo was maintained in an untunny fashion. That's what happens when you don't take your job seriously, and you think all it takes is to make cute girls doing cute things.
I stumbled upon this video, which is surprisingly accurate, although it didn't explain the mechanics of writing. Short version, Attack on Titan is very plot-driven, resulting to most of its characters losing importance after a while, because the events happening around them are more important than they are. They have little to no control over what is going on, and the horrible things they experience are more memorable than their personalities. In contrast, My Hero Academia is mostly character-driven, meaning most of its focus is placed on the characters and how they interact with each other. They do not lose importance as fast as the cast of Attack on Titan did, since they are constantly shown to be doing something individually and are not overshadowed by the events happening around them. Of course, this happens at the expense of the plot, since to the most part nothing of importance happens in the show. It's just a bunch of kids training in a school. There is nothing special in terms of world building, and anything negative is constantly taken away. There are no repercussions for failure, and even when there seem to be, are soon taken away. This is the fundamental difference with Attack on Titan, where failure meant death for countless people. One would assume this means any show with permanent deaths is worse than any show without permanent deaths. Or perhaps any show that is all about the characters and not much of a plot is better than any show that is all about the plot and less about the characters. And yet the classic example of Sword Art Online vs Log Horizon has the opposite effect. When nothing of importance keeps not happening for a long period of time, and there is no death to worry about, the viewer loses his interest. What actually happens in these shows is having a specific mindset which doesn't necessarily have to do with plot or characters. There are positives and negatives in both styles. Plot-driven shows often treat everyone as a plot device, while character-driven shows end up being slice of nothing happens. What really makes or breaks them in the long run is how much they stay true to their initial mindset. Most of the times, the show loses its glamour when it's no longer what it used to be at first. Take any once popular title and think of why it stopped being popular after a while. No longer airing is not the main reason. It's how it's changed to something completely alien from what it began as. Thus, this guy talking about plot versus character-driven narrative is making a big mistake, despite everything he says being right as a standalone example. It's another case of tunnel vision, where he compares a show that hasn't changed yet with a show that has and now seems to be less good as a result. He wouldn't be saying that if he only watched the first episodes of Attack on Titan. Give it some time and My Hero Academia will also change, and will also have people calling it less good than some other new show which didn't change yet. In fact, it's already happening in the manga right now, and people are already jumping ship to Black Clover.
Everybody is calling Boku no Hero Academia terrible, has plot holes. This is fairy tale now. Death doesn't mean anything. You losing his quirk doesn't matter anymore. All sense of threat is gone. It's a bad series now. Not good because of what just happened. There is going to be 51 episodes of Black Clover.
It's gonna kick you. It's gonna bring you down to your knees.
And this is amazing. This is hype. I think this is relatively good news.
Brings us down to our knees.
They're wanting to extend the series as long as possible, where they can animate as much as possible for as long as possible.
A tragedy that is one of the biggest things that probably fucked you up in life.
Obviously, quality is going to drop. So this makes me very happy to see.
We're in blood, sweat, and tears.
It's been a long time since we've had a long-running shonen.
I want to see some damn
long-running shonen.
God damn it.
The tragedies you've been through.
I adore proactive characters, since they are not simply reacting to a situation, but are also actively doing their own thing. They achieve that by making choices. A passive character does not choose what he's doing, he's just following a predetermined path. He's either following orders or is the product of something tragic that happened in his past. A proactive character has many paths available and can choose which one to follow. He's not sitting in a guild waiting for someone to give him a quest as they do in Fairy Tail. A small deception here is that in many cases a character is not proactive if he's not the one who is actually making the choice. It is fine if a decision is based on evaluating the available options and picking up the best one amongst them, but the character must be the one who makes the choice. Not someone appearing when the character doesn't know what to do and offering a solution that is going to make the choice obvious. The choice must be made based on what he knows up to that point and not based on last-moment revelations by a different character. That's essentially a Deus Ex Machina. This is why Shield Hero is crap in this department, since the main character is offered the slave option by some guy that appeared out of nowhere. That's right, the controversy of slavery wasn't even his idea. Another thing to pay attention to is if every choice has a different outcome, because if it doesn't, then what's the point of choosing in the first place? This is a problem with any story that is relying too much on plot progression instead of character-driven motivations. Whatever choices Naruto made in his life were rendered meaningless, since he was the chosen one and there was a prophecy to predetermine what will happen regardless of what he does. Another thing to pay attention to is not making the choice obvious. If the characters are too simple in personality or the world works with clear-cut black and white logic, then choices tend to be crystal clear in their outcome. One is going to be bad and one is going to be good. There's nothing to truly choose when one option is favored and the other one gets demonized. If you are Kirito and you have to choose between your waifus and a one-dimensional evil rapist, what doubt is there? Another thing to pay attention to is if the character in question gets victimized a lot. Because if he is, whatever choice he makes, regardless of it being right or wrong, is often painted as just, simply because he was victimized and thus he is right no matter what he does. I mean, does it matter if Chibi keeps fucking up when he's just going to cry on screen and play the victim card so his retarded fanbase will defend him regardless of him being an exploitive piece of shit? And the last thing to pay attention to is whether the character needs to make a choice in the first place. Because many times, he doesn't have to. He can pick more than one options, if not all of them. Other times, there is no choice to make in the first place. Which is why Bakugo being asked to join the League of Villains made no sense, since he had no reason to join them. He was number one as a hero in training. My gay food fetish is full of shit. You often hear a reader say, "I don't care about your character" or "I find him pathetic." Why is that, when you apparently did your best to make him flawed, grey or relatable? Sometimes it's not the writer's fault, as your reader is not viewing a character as intended. Other times it's an issue with the writer's prose or the expectations of the reader. But the way a reader feels is always the same when it comes to calling someone pathetic or sympathetic. To put it bluntly, a pathetic character deserves to suffer, while a sympathetic doesn't. If someone is being a jerk, he deserves what's coming to him, while if he doesn't do something to deserve a punishment, then it's sad when he suffers. Another way to see this is through one's involvement in the conflict of the story. If it has the means to resolve it but doesn't, he comes off as someone who punishes himself and others, thus he does not deserve your sympathy. If on the other hand he does not have the means to resolve it, at least not at the moment, then we feel sorry for him because he suffers for something that is beyond his power. Here is the catch: a sympathetic character can eventually become pathetic if the reader suddenly realizes he refuses to move on, do something, fix the problem, and so on. It comes down to active characters who move towards a goal, while procrastinating, regressing whatever resolve they used to have, and repeating the same mistake or harmful behavior. The reverse can also happen. A pathetic character, someone who initially is a bully, or a crybaby, or a passive observer with loser mentality, can gradually become sympathetic the more he tries to change himself, become happier, more active, successful, and so on. Any story with a coming-of-age plot fits this profile. It's the tale of the underdog, from zero to hero, or perhaps a redemption arc of someone atoning for his past sins. There are also cases when being pathetic is what makes a character good, so it should not be viewed as something a writer must always avoid. Holden from Watcher in the Eye is written to be a self-loathing youth with first-world problems. He is the source of the conflict, and he is supposed to reflect the feelings of others like him. That is what made him so famous at the time the book came out. In such a case, you have an empathetic or a relatable character, someone who you relate to, even if not for the best reasons. Here is another catch. It doesn't work if the reader does simply not like self-loathing losers in general. Shinji Ikari from Neon Genesis gets a lot of flack from many, although he is another Holden and with no control over the conflict of the story. This is a case when it's not the writer's fault, the reader is left dissatisfied. Empathy requires some sort of common ground between character and reader. If the reader never went through the same problems as the character, then he can't relate. Another thing regarding that is how sometimes a character does not do enough to pass as empathetic despite having common ground with the reader. This is especially common with empowerment fantasy plots that use double standards, meaning they try to be both cool and tragic at the same time. Cool is about doing something better and easier than anyone else. Tragic is having a character who expects your sympathy despite being overpowered or shielded by every major character of the story. Harry Potter has everything going his way if you read the books with an adult mindset. If this contradiction becomes too apparent, then the illusion breaks and you are left with a character that is pretentious by playing the victim card, on top of already being pathetic. The same applies to villains or antagonists who do a lot of harm and then suddenly wish to go through a redemption phase. Yes, it's nice to see them trying to do some good for a change, but saving a cat from a tree does not undo the massacre of millions. If the amount of good they do is astronomically smaller than the harm they caused, it ain't going to work regardless of how much they want to change. So the lesson of the day is, pathetic characters are not better than sympathetic when they are empathetic, but it takes more than being relatable. Some guy made a video to defend Son Goku as a flat archetype. His claim was, flat characters make up a huge portion of anime and movies, and they are very compelling exactly because they never waver from their ideals. Unlike characters that become better with time, like Vegeta, or become worse, like Zamasu, Goku stays the same because that is his archetype that defines the show. He's not trying to change, he's only changing those around him with his determination. Although this reasoning is fine, the justification falters when you have a story with plot continuity and power-ups. In the same video he mentions Indiana Jones as another character who was compelling for staying the same in the trilogy, and how people didn't like how he got old in the fourth one. He was supposed to be an empowerment fantasy that never ages and stays cool forever. That is understood, but the Indiana Jones movies don't have plot continuity or power-ups. As much as compelling a flat character can be, when Goku is in his 50s and still acts like the same 10-year-old he was in the beginning of the series, despite the dozens of power-ups he had received over the decades, then he comes off as an autistic man-child who refuses to grow up while everyone else around him moves on. It's even worse when the world blames him for not learning, as was the case in the Tournament of Power. Entire universes were being wiped out because of his childish behavior. He still didn't give a shit and kept acting like a 10-year-old. Because he's not supposed to learn, it's his job to be flat. It doesn't matter if everything was fixed at the end. The point was his complete lack of empathy with what was going on around him. So although a flat character is fine on his own, a story is not fine with such characters in it when there is plot continuity. It eventually challenges the ideals of the main character because from a point on the world changes so much, the main character ends up having no relation with the world. The most famous example is Naruto, who started off as an underdog, then became the chosen one, and eventually turned into a washed-out dad in the sequel. The setting and the themes kept changing, but he couldn't escape his initial believe it mentality, and the result was a protagonist who was a far cry from what hundreds of thousands of people used to find compelling about him. This is a common problem with almost every fighting shonen, since they rely on power-ups for getting through any problem instead of the characters learning about the world they live in and slowly becoming better at dealing with progressively bigger problems by having a better comprehension of it. One Piece is a prime example of this, despite the villains becoming progressively stronger, and the amount of influence Luffy has on the world keeps increasing with each victory. Luffy as a character stays the same and only resorts to more power-ups for fixing everything. Even now, when he was one-shotted by Kaido and locked in prison where he's supposed to agree to work for Kaido, the only thing anyone expects him to do is escape, get a power-up and move to the next island without changing at all. They don't expect him to have a better comprehension of the status quo he's trying to overthrow, and thus find a smart way to change it by working through the system. That implies he's smart, which he isn't, because he remains the same man-child since the beginning of the series. What's even worse with flat characters is when the show spoils the outcome while at the same time constantly making a flat character to doubt himself. That is one inexcusable mistake My Hero Academia does all the time. Deku never changes. He acts like a hero since episode 1, he will become the greatest hero at the end, as the show itself spoiled in episode 1, and yet the show constantly makes it seem like it's character development every time Deku doubts himself or gets a power-up. It's a waste of time and dishonest, since nothing ever changes. Deku has no development or something to doubt, since he's a flat character that gets constantly validated by the plot. There is no realization in his journey towards becoming the greatest, because if there was, he wouldn't be given a dozen different superpowers without even trying, while at the same time constantly saying in the first episodes he will never have a single one superpower and that he will never become a hero. It doesn't work when we know the outcome. Flat characters exist as monolithic empowerment fantasies. They are not supposed to doubt themselves, they are not supposed to change or lose. They are also not supposed to stick around once the status quo changes, because they become alienated from the very setting they affect. This is the pyramid of needs. If you simplify what each part means for an average person, it comes down to be alive, have a job, be in a romantic relationship, feel needed, and be special. For an average person, these needs are fulfilled in an upwards fashion. You can't be special if you don't feel needed. You can't feel needed if nobody cares about you. You can't maintain a romantic interest if you can't have a job to sustain a relationship. And you can't work if you don't even have the strength to stay alive. In fiction, it is very boring for most to follow the story of an average person. Most want the main character to be special in some way, which is why a large portion of stories we watch and read are often empowerment fantasies or follow the underdog formula. Those tend to move in a reverse order. A character that starts from the bottom with nothing to feed himself or his family, but is otherwise talented or never gives up. This results to being useful to anyone he's helping out. And because he's so helpful, someone is going to fall in love with him for being so good with people. And with time he will go up the ranks and earn a very important official title, so he will no longer be a vagrant nobody pays attention to. And the story will end with him being rich and famous and respected, and all his needs from the beginning of the story will have been taken care of. This formula tends to get dull the more the story goes on, since the closer the main character gets to his goals, the less of an underdog he becomes. The more he gains, the less relatable he is compared to how he began. Which is why the more cunning writers tend to combine both formulas at the same time, in a way that is similar to civilization building games. The more the special protagonist goes down the pyramid, the more his mundane friends and family go up the pyramid. This safeguards a show from never becoming completely boring to the audience, since the less relatable the main character becomes, the more interesting the society he builds around him becomes. It's a strategy used by most long-running action and adventure series. They keep introducing more and more characters and locations for enriching lore, history, politics and geography. Thus, even when the main characters become shadows of what they used to be, most of the audience will stick around just for the setting and how it keeps getting bigger with each passing arc. It's also an interesting way to see how something that begins as a personal quest or a selfish desire eventually expands into how a fictional world functions. The thing is, there is no turning back after that. Once your main character loses his appeal and the setting grows stale, you cannot redo the whole thing by returning the focus on the character and going back to square one with the setting. It never works, and it only renders useless the progress that was achieved thus far. In case you want the story to keep going, you set it in the future when the first main character is too old or dead, and most of everything he achieved has lost its value. You have a new character that is starting from scratch, and you have none of the old cast. Because if you do, they will always be overshadowing everything he does, and the audience will care only about them. And I know this will sound boring for most of the old fans, but it's the only way for a show to keep going without feeling like a needless continuation. If your main character has achieved his goal and the world has no needs, then you have to reset the scales or it feels pointless. FYI, I dropped JoJo Part 5 after 5 episodes of complete lack of engagement. The characters had zero appeal and I didn't give a shit about the plot. I had a blast with the first 3 parts, and then it got boring. When I had a chat about it with a JoJo tard on Reddit, he said it's actually the other way around. It's part 4 when JoJo begins to get good, because the stunts become more interesting and elaborate. Before part 4 the battles were very simple and thus the whole show was bad up to that point. The argument came down to me not watching JoJo for the stands. I was watching JoJo for JoJo. When the stakes were high and the characters were muscular and there was personal investment in beating the bad guy. Saving or avenging a relative for something bad that happened to her, that sort of thing. Hammond and the stands were an afterthought, just there for the rule of cool. This changed in Part 4. There weren't that many stakes anymore, everyone was slim and feminine, and there was not much investment in beating the bad guy. The stunts became more memorable than the personalities of the characters who were using them, so basically everyone was defined by his superpower instead of who he was or what he was doing. Which brings us to the episodes where King Crimson appears and the only thing people are discussing is how it works. Nobody cares about the characters or the plot anymore, and everything essentially became,
I want to see some damn Bankais, goddammit.
And I say fuck that, and fuck JoJo. I was watching the show for the cool characters, not how they use ass pulls and sudden power-ups. JoJo was ruined by becoming yet another dumb shonen where everyone is more interested in how strong is someone, and what statistics his stand power has, and how all that shit are supposed to make sense when they are not supposed to make any sense because it's all about the rule of cool. Instead of giving you any reason to care about the cast or the plot, now it's all about OCD power scalers trying to explain typical shonen bullshit.
I have had a few issues with the power levels. It really has made no sense at all. The straight up numbers that are being given are completely baffling. I don't really understand the thought process on all these numbers and power scaling and whatnot. It doesn't make any sense at all, and I just can't believe how inconsistent these people's power levels seem to be. It just really is crazy when you actually look at all these numbers. Are blowing my mind. They're 3,000-ish, maybe even 4,000-ish. They magically got a lot more powerful. I don't really think it's that fair how they got that much more powerful from doing nothing, basically. Comes out of nowhere and is just unbelievably powerful for really no reason. I don't see why he just had to be so much more powerful than her out of nowhere. Confirmed power level of 200,000. That was something that just happened out of nowhere. I don't know how King is one-shotting people with the highest power level we've seen. And so many of these power levels completely different than what they used to be. I mean, Zeldris has a confirmed power level of 60,000, yet he is somehow tangling with people who have a confirmed power level of 291,000. It just makes no sense whatsoever. It's extremely inconsistent. She's supposed to have under a 5,000 power level, and she is pretty equally effective, as like Ludashell, who has a power level of 291,000. Why is she able to compete with these people? I have no idea. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's just absolutely insane. All these numbers have been thrown out through the series, which was really nice. It gave me a gauge of where people were at, but they're not being represented that way. Like, he'll throw out a number of somebody's power level, and another of somebody else's, and they're going to be completely different, like super far away from each other. Then these people will fight each other, and they just change in power levels all the time. So I just don't understand what is going on in this series. I don't understand where these numbers are coming from, why this is necessary for them to be so inconsistent. I don't really see I don't think this had to happen. I think everyone could just work together and it would have made more sense. But no, it's so insane. I don't even know what to say. Whatever. What are you going to do?
As it has been proven again and again, series with a large number of characters don't do anything with them besides introducing them. It boils down to the protagonist and a few major characters around him, hoarding all the attention and the powers and being the only ones who matter in general. Partly because they don't know what to do with them, partly because they don't have to do anything with them when the fans will be supporting that by claiming only the protagonist matters, and partly because the only reason they exist is so they can make fighting games and gachas with a lot of units. Assuming you don't like this and you would rather have more than a couple of characters getting attention, here are 5 very simple ways for keeping a large number of characters relevant. Number 1. Don't make the major characters the strongest, or the ones who get all the important powers. As long as they cannot solo every opponent, they need others for helping them out, and thus the others remain relevant. Number 2. Give a specialization to every character in a team. This way he's always going to be important in that specific task or ability, regardless of how strong the protagonist is. Number 3. Have more than one protagonist. The more teams you have, each one with its own agenda, that doesn't exist simply as an obstacle for the protagonist to overcome, the more characters remain relevant. Number 4. Give every character a life. The main characters can be broken as shit, but as long as the minor ones have something to show in the meantime, they don't feel like background decoration and will make the setting more lively. And number 5, give every character a goal other than the main one. Although they will never be able to be as important as the main ones, they will still be going after something they want, thus making the setting more dynamic and evolving. There you go, some very simple tips for how you can prevent your story from being about a special chosen one with broken powers who eclipses everyone else. Stuff that is very easy to understand, yet almost nobody cares about, because they are tasteless casuals who just want an overpowered self-insert and hundreds of gacha units. So I found this guy being disappointed with Nezuko. That's the chick from Demon Slayer. He finds her shallow, without personality, and just there to be cute. All that are true. At the same time, she's not useless. She constantly assists in battles, and by being constantly present, the viewer does not forget the driving force of the main character. So what's going on here? Is she an actually good character or not? Let's take 2 extreme examples. Sakura in Naruto has some personality, constantly assists in battles, but she's otherwise useless because whatever she does has no impact on the plot. The mother in Stardust Crusaders is a driving force behind the conflict, thus she has an impact on the plot, but she's otherwise not doing anything and spends the whole arc in being sick on a bed. Does that mean Nezuko is a better character than these two for both being useful and for affecting the plot? Not really, because she doesn't have a will of her own. She's more of a dog, a mascot, or a tool to be used in battle. You never think she's her own character, because she can do nothing on her own. As useless as Sakura was, she was always thinking and acting on her own. Nezuko doesn't do that. It's another case where a drama and utility overlapped characterization. It's like Shelter, that music video which got hyped some years ago, for having a generic Moeblop as the main character. She has no defining features other than being cute. She has the ability to change her world however she pleases. She is the driving force behind the plot, but she's otherwise not interesting. The things that happen to her are more interesting than her as a character. Down to it, it's always preferable to have both strong characterization and usefulness in the plot. In case you can't have both, then you need to be aware of what type of a show you're watching. If the characterization is simple, then it's a concept-driven story. If the characterization is strong, then it's a character-driven story. Can characterization be both simple and strong? Yes, but in such cases the plot becomes an afterthought, as is the case with school comedies, Slice of Nothing Happens, and Demon Slayer. Nobara in Jujutsu Kaisen is the most recent example of late character returns. Of someone who is absent for the majority of a story, and by the time he is back close to the ending of the story, it's too late to do anything significant with him aside from ending plot lines in a rushed manner. Nobara was considered dead for half of the manga, and then she comes back out of nowhere 5 chapters before the ending just to instantly defeat the main villain. At least she did something compared to Stain in My Hero Academia, who did jack shit by the time he was back. Same with Annie in Attack on Titan, by the time she was out of the crystal she had nothing to do anymore. It's a typical issue with most writers who neglect to show tertiary characters in a faraway place despite being important during the time they were last seen. They only bring them back because the story is about to be over and not because it's the proper time to return. As a result, they get completely overshadowed by the events of the finale and nobody's pleased by their return. This is the result of making a story on the go, and instead of wrapping up plot points, you instead keep adding more and more plot points, forcing the older ones to be completely neglected. And that is why One Piece is gonna have the most disappointing ending of all times. Nobody outside the main characters does anything for decades, and there are thousands of plot threads by now, which are obviously not gonna be fulfilled when Oda announces One Piece is ending in 5 chapters. So I found this post where a guy calls the obligatory throwaway feel-good show of the season to be the most relatable anime he has watched in his life. There is absolutely nothing special about that show. It is something you can find in several anime every season. He just finds it relatable because the main character is a worker like himself. Okay, so far, we can all relate to people who are having the same problems as we do. You know, like working. Give me money so I won't have to go through the same ordeal.
Patreon in the description below.
The thing is, there are also cute fox waifus in the show, and he still finds it relatable. This would normally make it unrelatable, because it has nothing to do with his life. There is no such thing as cute fox waifus that will be waiting for you every day after work. The best you can hope for is a normal woman who will most likely gotten fed up with waiting for you every day and won't even be bothering to get up from the couch to greet you anymore. And that is the most ideal situation. Most women work nowadays, so they return home tired and with no energy to interact with you. The only thing they want is to sleep so they can return to their boring daily routine the following day. Give me money so I won't have to go through the same ordeal.
Patreon in the description below.
The stuff that happen in Senko-san are not relatable. They are desirable. It's not the same thing. One means it's exactly like you, the other means it's how you wish your life would be like. This is not a case of fooling around with unimportant semantics. It's very important to call it what it is. If you relate with what you desire, you are going to be more miserable in the long run, because the only thing you will be looking forward to is to keep not having what you want. Series like Welcome to the NHK are all about trying to improve yourself and gain what you desire. They are motivating you to become a better person through the lives of those who strive for more. They are not pandering your desires, so you will be addicted to a drug that does not fix your problems, and instead only makes you waste your years on being content with what others have, and you don't bother to have. That's the thing with PADS, which means post-anime depression syndrome. Harems and isekai and everything that counts as empowerment fantasy are all about showing you desirable situations. The reason so many people cry or feel depressed after they finish an anime is not because it's relatable, but because it was giving them something they do not have in their lives. And now it's over, and they have to return to their boring normal lives. And they don't like that, so they get depressed and go to post all over the internet how much it made them cry because it was relatable, when it was just desirable. It's one thing to feel sympathy towards the characters of a show you are watching. It's fine when you cry because they are empathetic and make you feel the feels they felt deep in your feels. But it's a whole different thing when you call relatable what you desire. You are fooling yourselves and hurt your mental health in the process. And now, give me money because it's so relatable when you give me something I don't have and constantly desire. If you don't give me money, you cannot relate with me. Someone asked on Reddit what they would want more out of Uraraka as a character. Unlike that retarded article that claimed she breaks the curse of female characters, pretty much everyone said the exact opposite thing. She needs more screen time, she needs to go after her own goals, and she needs to stop idolizing Deku. Basically, she needs to be her own character instead of being background decoration and a fun girl that constantly validates the protagonist. The exact same thing can be said about any other secondary character in any other show. A character is vastly more interesting when he has his own objective and is not chained to the protagonist. That is the appeal of characters in shows like the Game of Thrones or Full Metal Alchemist. Each one of them can be his or her own protagonist if they are left to their own devices. And that requires characters that can do something not related to the main character's goal. Most lazily written characters can't do something on their own because they were conceived as nothing more than allies or enemies of the main character. They might have different goals at first, and they might seem to have their own story to tell, but an incompetent writer does not know what to do with them past their introduction arc, and will throw them in the background where they will be never significant ever again. A good writer does not let his characters go to waste. And that is why I am better than any shonen mangaka to whom the shonen tards have faith in. Here is something I found on the Samurai 8 subforum. Let me narrate the topic and the replies. The most interesting aspect of this manga for me is the abilities or techniques. They seem so well thought, and the way they are presented in the story gives them a mysterious vibe. I hope next chapter will introduce new abilities and high-level fight.
I want to see some damn bankais, goddammit.
Can't wait to see the other samurai styles in action.
It just will fucking piss me off if I don't see about 95% of everybody's powers.
True, the explanation of how dog paddle works was really good. Can't wait to see what the other 4 schools are capable of.
See some damn bankais.
This is exactly something I expected from a manga written by Naruto's mangaka. Both have very creative and logical skill system.
See about 95% of everybody's powers.
And now for a reasonable comment from the only logical person left in this community. So you like the abilities more than the character who is using them? That's bad characterization 101.
Bankais, goddammit.
And the best part is how you're not gonna be able to see this comment if you go to that topic, because I am shadow banned from this subforum. We can't have negative opinions appearing on the Samurai 8 subforum. That's what modern anime fans are like.
See some damn bankais.
These are all comments from the latest episode of the Gay Food Fetish. Almost a third of them are now about people complaining about how boring the show has become. The reasons are many and I have talked about them in previous videos. What I want to focus on is how the fanboys are defending the season. We needed 8 seasons of a build-up, they say. We needed to flesh out the new characters, they say. How would you care about the new characters if they didn't have a build-up so they can be fleshed out? And here's the big revelation. Who said the show needed more characters? Most fans of the show were fine with the old cast. One of their biggest complaints was how only a handful of characters were important and the rest quickly became background decoration. And instead of getting episodes that develop the older characters, which they care about, the show keeps throwing in more characters which they don't care about. Even if they claim a lot of episodes are dedicated on getting to like these new characters, it doesn't change the fact that a lot of the fans didn't want more characters. They wanted more of the older characters. It's not a weird request. Why give them more characters when they don't want more characters? Wanting development for the older characters instead of being told to forget them and like these new characters which are not developed either is reasonable. That is a common mistake a lot of sequels are making and end up alienating their fan base. They neglect the older cast and keep introducing more characters which don't have the same appeal and is not what the audience wanted more of. So any fanboy who keeps yapping about how vital it is to waste dozens of episodes on developing new characters, just shut the hell up. Nobody cares about the cast of Boruto. They would rather watch Naruto fillers. Nobody cares about the new cast of the Star Wars. They only wanted to see the older cast. And nobody gives a shit about the hundreds of thousands of mooks fighting in Alicization right now. They're just waiting for Asuna to arrive and Kirito to wake up from his coma so they can kick the crap out of everyone. Stop expanding a roster that nobody cares about. Just focus on a small cast that everybody loves and you make your hype and your money. It's that simple. The rest of it is bullshit excuses.
Let the past die. Kill it, if you have to.
Let's clarify something regarding what counts as ideal loss and gain when it comes to characterization. In most stories, a character gets his motivation because of something he lost. A relative died, his hometown was destroyed, his girlfriend was kidnapped, that sort of thing. It can be something simpler, such as being poor or feeling useless and neglected, but generally speaking, the bigger the loss feels in the beginning, the more motivated a character becomes. Losing something can be an easy way to justify whatever someone is doing throughout the story. On the other hand, having a character that starts off with a lot and simply wants to have even more is usually an easy way to hate someone. Most cheesy villains, for example, start off as members of a rich and powerful organization that wants to take over the world or some shit like that. Such characters are already rich and powerful and just want even more. They did not lose something, unless we can count compassion and humanity as a moral message at the end, so their motivation comes off as unrelatable for most in the audience. That is why underdogs are so popular, while prodigies and governments are seen in a negative light. The former want to gain something they lost, the latter are just greedy bastards. Loss is something that usually works as motivation and happens in the beginning of a story. At the end of the story there is going to be some sort of a gain. If there is no gain, then the journey felt pointless. The thing is, if a character gains exactly what he lost, that means nothing for his characterization. Let's use a cheesy premise of an 80s action flick. Someone stole your woman, and the whole plot is about getting her back at the end. How does the plot add anything to your personality if all you aim for is to go back to the beginning exactly as you began? There was no actual progress or development. It was just one fruitless circle. It might be a functional plot, but it's also a forgettable one. The audience won't care about the plot or the characters in such a story. The action might be good, but everything else will be passable. Which is why what you gain along the way is very important. It can be something cheesy like getting new skills, making a lot of friends, and changing the world for the better. Or it can be something more profound, such as finding out more about the world and about yourself, that changes you by the time you get to whatever you lost. So basically, it's the journey where you gain something, not the destination. And come to think of it, it's even more profound when what you gain when you reach the end of a journey is never exactly what you lost, because what you were aiming for in the beginning is gone forever, and you would never get it back no matter what you would do. So if we go back to the cheesy premise, there is nothing special about a character whose generic damsel in distress got abducted by an archetypical rich and powerful villain, and the plot is just the protagonist bidding everyone in order to get her back with no need to train, get weapons or make allies along the way. On the other hand, if said protagonist does all the aforementioned things, the damsel in distress reveals that she was getting fed up with her boyfriend and wanted an excuse to break up with him, and the villain is proven to be actually in love with her, and even makes her fall in love with him by the time the protagonist finds them, then you get something far more memorable. Because everyone lost something, gained something, and what they gained was not what they lost. And that is how you can figure out if a story is just typical empowerment fantasy and rule of cool, or has actual character depth and growth. In a shallow story, the character never loses something permanently. He lost his woman, he gets her back. He lost his powers, he gets them back. His friends died, he resurrects them. He might be gaining more powers and allies along the way, but if he gets everything he lost, he doesn't change as a person, because he doesn't have to adjust to the permanent loss of something or someone. Character depth and progression are changed to losing something and gaining something else in their stead. A shallow power fantasy never loses something permanently. He just gets more and more powerful and gets everything at the end. An actual character with depth never gets back everything he lost and changes along the way by the things he learned and the people he met. And that is how you tell apart a shitty story from a good story. In this topic I found on Reddit, someone was finding it absurd when people claim certain characters would be overpowered if they were villains, implying that the villains are not holding back all the time and having all the broken powers of a main character. They would be unstoppable. Speaking in tropes, if someone is a villain, he wouldn't have plot armor, and therefore he wouldn't be unstoppable either way. That aside, it's a case of being unbound or being uncontrolled. If no moral issues are holding you back from doing whatever you like, then on one hand you are not afraid to go all out, and on the other hand you might find yourself not being able to control what you are doing. Putting restraints on what you can do is not just a way for not being at full power, but also for not hurting yourself or those you care about. You know, it's the stereotype of your dark side making you stronger while at the same time killing you or taking away your humanity and turning you into a mindless beast, therefore you are no longer you. Without restraint, you are basically ending yourself. And even when we take the morality angle, where the good guys are holding back from killing their enemies while the villains generally don't have this issue, it doesn't have anything to do with being good or evil. Every character has a portfolio or an ideology, and as long as he stays true to it, then he can win. If, for example, a hero takes an oath to never kill, then if he kills the villain, it is the same as having lost the fight because he didn't stay true to his own ideals. The same logic applies to the villain. If he has an objective, then doing anything that hurts his objective is the same as having lost. In conclusion, a hero becoming a villain doesn't mean anything narrative-wise. A character is as strong as his dedication to his goals, not the number of victories or how much he's not holding back from killing his enemies. Some of you didn't get what was the problem with killing America-chan in My Hero Academia, so it's time to explain something that shouldn't need explaining because it's that obvious. But then again, I am smart and you're not, so it makes sense why it's obvious to me and unthinkable to you. So the problem here is not that America-chan died in 5 chapters. The problem was that she was introduced just for quickly changing the plot, and then was kicked out of the plot. It's not about killing characters as soon as they are introduced. You can kill as many farmers with a shotgun as you like after 5 minutes of screen time. They won't have any impact on the plot. America-chan was not a farmer with a shotgun. She was a major character in the setting, introduced late in the story, with no foreshadowing, changing the plot however it suits the plot, and then getting discarded for serving her purpose. If someone is supposed to be important to the setting, you don't kill him in a hurry, because that way you never showed why he was important to begin with. America-chan was supposed to be there from the beginning of the story with a power that could have defeated everyone in a few seconds. By not giving her any foreshadowing or build-up or even screen time, she becomes an excuse for changing the plot in whatever way the author wants without having to spend any time on it. Therefore, it is bad writing, regardless of serving a purpose for the story. It doesn't matter if America-chan symbolizes Deku's evil side or some bullshit like that. She was given no screen time to show it. She was a plot device that was written in a hurry for ending the plot faster now that the audience has lost interest in the manga and the studio will be making money only through filler movies for fujoshis. Therefore, despite this Deku fanboy here trying to make it seem like America-chan is not badly introduced like Kaguya in Naruto, he is wrong because she totally is introduced equally as bad. Kaguya was made up because Kishimoto made Madara too OP, America-chan was made up because Horikoshi shit made Shit Garaki too OP. It's the exact same reason that proves My Hero Academia is as badly written as Naruto. I found this video that is desperately trying to present that show with pedophiles to be deep and mature. All his claims come down to, this is how a mature character would behave based on his personality and the environment he is in. Here's the thing with this stupid claim. You can say it for any show in existence. You can say Son Goku is a mature character because based on his personality, it makes sense why he lets his enemies escape or heals them so they can become a bigger threat and he can have a reason to keep getting stronger and thus be able to protect Earth. It's all according to his personality and that is why he is mature. Also, the show is a fighting shonen. Everything in the setting is one big arena for the characters to fight in. Therefore, it makes complete sense for Son Goku to behave that way based on how the show was written to be. K-On! Is about cute girls in a high school. This is how moe girls should behave based on the archetype they were written from. And the setting is fluffy and tensionless because it was written to be relaxing escapism for depressed people with no social life. This proves how mature the show is. Actually, no. That only means the makers of the show are not letting the characters be inconsistent. They behave as they were written to behave in a setting that was written in a certain way. The characters of Game of Thrones were swearing, killing and screwing all the time. This didn't make them mature, it only made them fit in the setting they are part of. Same with Goku in Dragon Ball and the girls in K-On! 9 out of 10 idiots who say Pedoshoku has mature characters, as opposed to other isekai that don't have mature characters, fail to realize the other isekai were not written to be that way. They were not written to have pedophiles in settings where everyone is cheating on his wife, molests children, and brainwashes women to be sluts against their will. They were written to be generic power fantasy harems, and in that regard their protagonists fit well in those settings. If Rudy could switch places with any other protagonist, he would be a shitty protagonist since he wouldn't be as overpowered as them, and he would be a complete creep in a setting where all the women are one-dimensional and love you right away. How would he fit in all that? He wouldn't, the same way Naruto wouldn't be able to use the power of friendship in Berserk. And Son Goku would be a complete jackass in the setting of CSI Miami. None of these characters would be anything special in any other setting. They come off as mature only when you compare them with other protagonists in the setting of the former, not the latter. And that is why once again it was proven why pedo apologists who defend Pedoshoku and make it seem mature are full of shit. This video is about measuring character appeal, which is how much likable or not a character is. It all begins with traits, which in fiction can either be positive or negative. If they are neither, they're just quirks, they don't do anything. They just exist for flavor, but not for appeal. So if you take Zoro from One Piece, the scar on his eye doesn't do anything, so it doesn't matter. Him getting constantly lost is a negative trait, and him being a good swordsman in battle is a positive trait. So, assuming you have written down the positive traits and the negative traits, and you ignore the character quirks, you separate the traits into active and passive. Active is anything that affects other characters, and passive is anything that affects only him as a person. Active traits are far more important than passive traits, because they lead to interaction with other characters and move the plot forward. Passive traits are more about personality gimmicks which, unlike character quirks, they have a small effect on the plot but only on a personal level. Using Zoro again, him getting constantly lost is a passive trait, and him being a good swordsman in battle is an active trait. The more positive and active traits a character has, the more his appeal rises. The more negative and passive traits he has, the more unlikable he becomes. This is why when you compare Sanji to Zoro, Sanji has less appeal. Being a simp is an active negative trait since it involves falling at the feet of women. Does this mean that a flawless character always has the maximum appeal? No, because a flawless character is a boring character, because he's good at everything and has nothing to aim getting better at. Negative traits make someone imperfect, able to relate with, cheer for, hope he gets better, and so on. So once you separate the traits, then you see how the characters stand compared to other characters in the show. Because there are many cases when, despite having a lot of appeal on a personal level, a character doesn't have much when compared to other characters. This is why the protagonists of shows such as My Hero Academia, Jujutsu Kaisen and Tokyo Revengers don't have much appeal compared to other characters. They get overshadowed by others with more appeal and often come off as loser crybabies. Then you have to keep in mind the shift in one's appeal as the story progresses, because usually the importance of a character goes up or down depending on what happens in the plot in later arcs. Nami's negative trait was betraying her nakama and her positive trait was being the navigator of the ship. As the plot went on, she doesn't betray anyone anymore, and navigating the ship doesn't feel important as it used to. Her appeal is no longer there, she's now just there as fan service. And finally, you have to take into account the target audience, since specific characters appeal to specific people, and thus certain quirks and traits value differently for those specific people. This is why everyone who is a simp will treat Sanji's negative trait as a positive one, or Nami's constantly growing boobs to be a positive trait for ornery otakus, when it's otherwise an unimportant quirk. Obviously, such people have bad taste since they don't care about gold standards and promote degeneracy. I am just pointing this out because the anime community is mostly these guys, and not people like me who truly know what counts as good writing. And there you have it, do the math and you have the appeal of a character at any given point in a story. There is a huge disconnect when it comes to those who want fictional characters to develop and those who want a show to keep going with the same feeling. The former want to see the characters growing up, learning, maturing, sometimes dying and letting the next generation to take charge. Although most people would want that out of their favorite characters, in practice, very few would actually want that. I mean, how many would want to see their heroes growing old and losing everything they liked about them? How many would want to see them getting replaced by younger heroes who are either carbon copies or who have no relation to them? How many would want to see them not being protagonists anymore? Well, let me tell you, not as many as you might think. As much as we mocked Toriyama for setting up Gohan as the new protagonist after Goku's character arc had been completed, the show would have lost most of its audience if it hadn't brought back Goku and shoved Gohan to the side. As much as we mocked Oda for turning Luffy into a goofy cartoon instead of making him more mature and reliable after the death of Ace, the manga sales would have tanked if he did that. Look what happened to Boruto. It replaced Naruto and Sasuke with a new generation and the sales tanked. The only times it was ever popular was when Naruto and Sasuke were involved. Thus, as much as it saddens us, we won't be getting much development, especially in a medium that is mostly escapism and empowerment fantasy. 99% of the audience would rather watch 50-year-old Goku and Luffy, remaining retards who just change hair colors, than getting any development. They didn't like seeing Naruto becoming a washed-up dad, the same way they didn't like seeing Han Solo or Indiana Jones becoming washed-up dads. It's the sad truth, and the industry is onto it when it wants to make money. Why would it develop the characters when it can keep selling merchandise based on how they are instead of how they end up being later on? This is true even for 80s IPs. People keep buying merchandise mostly based on the original Transformers, the original G.I. Joes, the original Thundercats, and so on. They don't care about latter characters, much less about aged-up forms. They just keep rebuying the same thing over and over again. It's why Pokemon games hardly change over time. People will keep buying them because they look like the first games. The only thing the few of us who like developments can do is point fingers and laugh at anyone who still hopes there's gonna be character progression in a show that is not meant to have any, and he wouldn't like it if he got what he wanted anyways. Because it's one thing to want to change, and it's a whole other when you get it and you lose interest.